to order. We have a quorum with Peggy, myself, Jim, that makes a quorum, and Pat. The intent of the full committee posting at 6:15 is so that this work at hand on the budget can be done by the entire committee. But so the entire committee at 6:15, we have a quorum. We'll call that meeting to order concurrent. But the focus will be on budget, and it will be a discussion and advisory. I anticipate we're going to take no votes, but we'll function like a budget subcommittee making recommendations that we can go home and think about. So I hope folks can swallow the urge to tamp down any idea you just can't stand, because that's all we're dealing with anymore is ideas that are unacceptable. So TV's going. So's my phone, excuse me.
Just on the bottom of our agenda, a reminder to all of you that this meeting is being recorded by NCTV for future broadcast on their local cable channel. This meeting is also streamlined live on their Facebook page when able. And that will be happening.
Can you use the mic?
Use the mic, Pat. I'm
The
sorry.
cords are on, we really can't hear.
We have to do the whole thing.
All right.
They're really loud.
Okay. Didn't want to take over after David, but he was talking on his phone. A reminder to all that this meeting is being recorded by BN Community Television for future broadcast on your local cable channel. This meeting may also be streamed live on their Facebook page when able. That will happen from now on, just so everybody knows they're being filmed if they come up and speak.
Can you still hear me? Yes. So the first order of business is to gain an understanding of how the current budget iteration plays out on the ground in terms of impacts at elementary and at Pioneer Middle and High School. Broad brush strokes. We've seen reductions, we've seen adjustments, and Tanya, I'd like you to lead that discussion.
Gail, do you want to talk about the meetings we've had the last 2 days, or do you want me to?
Is that appropriate?
Sure, absolutely.
Because we've both been involved in those, so.
So, is this on, Tyler? Okay, thank you. So the last 2 days, I'd like to thank the administrative team and Brenda we couldn't find a time that worked collaboratively for everyone, so we met Monday and Tuesday. What we did was add back in, we had previously added back in the list on 512 that was omitted by the superintendent from the budget. And in addition to that, yesterday and today, we also added in and then cut again. We've cut a number of times previous to yesterday and today, obviously. And that list is in front of your agenda, or behind your agenda, excuse me. So we put the actual expenditures in for separation costs, health and life insurance, the overseer that we now know the cost of, unemployment, and Medicare taxes. And these are accurate. They were inaccurate or not budgeted for. So, and we went line by line by site. So everything that we are aware of as an administrative team that needs to be budgeted for today, June 12th, is in this budget. So after 6 hours today and yesterday, We still have a deficit, as you can see on the last page. After cutting, again, both days and adding those 2 pages back in, we still have a deficit of $285,332. We stopped because now, at this point, your discussion needs to be, where do we go from here? You have a color-coordinated, organized list from May 12th that we prepared for you to debate upon. You have explanations beside the budget lines which you requested from last Thursday evening. We had them there, they were taken out, we put them back in and added more. So you have the explanation as to not every single line, because it's, say it's a supply line and it's less, it's cut. So we didn't go down, we didn't have time, and we didn't go down every single line. We went down the most, I'm going to say the most important, the ones that were cut to the greatest amount of money, to give you some explanation, which is what you requested. So I hope that's helpful.
It is. I have a question about the separation costs. If you could share the basis for why 35,000 is adequate. Of course, I don't know 100% how many staff reductions we're talking about yet, but my calculation is that if we lay off an employee that costs us, and that the wage is 50,000, we have a potential exposure of 17,000 on that, on one employee.
So Dave, I'm going to speak to this real quick.
Thank you, I was just going to refer her.
The separation cost is solely for anyone that retires that we have retirement fund fees for. And while we're speaking about this, you have referred to multiple times in the meetings the last couple weeks the 10,000 and the 20,000 based on what type of employee they are for unemployment costs. We are, in essence, self-insured. However, we don't necessarily pay the actual unemployment bill. After speaking with Suzanne, essentially what happens is our rate goes up for 5 years once we've had an extensive layoff. So right now, our percentage is 5% versus another school district that might have 1 or 2%. So the unemployment cost that's in this budget is what you're talking to. So it's under the unemployment taxes payable to 50,000, and I have to back up for that.
First page.
Yes, so that is how the unemployment works. I just wanted to clarify that. We're not essentially cutting checks to unemployment for them to reimburse these people for their unemployment. Our rates are adjusted accordingly based on the amount of layoffs and stuff we have, and from what I understand, that rate is set to cover for 5 years, so it's weighted out, so to speak. So when we lay off additional staff, that's not going to go up or down right away.
So it's not necessarily premium based.
It's like a hybrid between,
like
yes, so it's kind of a hybrid between self-insurance and a flat unemployment rate to the state, if you will, is what I'm understanding for that. So just wanted to reassure that that number is what we're looking at. And real quickly, talking to the health and life insurance, Peggy just presented with me the most current FY19 local aid estimates, showing $831,000 for school choice receiving tuition is what the proposal is right now. The health insurance line that is currently in this budget you guys were given today is based on what we received in FY18 for school choice receiving, of $63,000 a month, so estimated at $720,000. So we may have some room to move health insurance over to that school choice line. But other than that, I did sit with Gail and all the administrative staff on Monday. I wasn't able to make it earlier today, and went through the process with them of adjusting up and down, verifying that the salaries that are in these lines are actually for the people that are currently going to be in these positions. We had a salary list out and the whole 9 yards. So I'm very confident that the numbers we have in front of us are what we need. Like I said, the health insurance line is the only one that if we're gonna get 831,000, that's $100,000 difference, so that would be a huge change. So before we make any final decisions, we might wanna touch base with the state to find out, if those are solid numbers, because if we move $100,000 and then they come back and give us 720, then that puts us in a hole again. In addition, the school choice and charter sending is looking to be about 22,000 higher than what we originally budgeted based on the most current proposal of 766, 678. So that adds 22,000 to the final line on the district administration line, which is on the second page of the budget. The only other question I had, now that Brenda is back, is on the unemployment. I did a calculation today based on all the updated salaries that are in this budget, multiplied to include step increases, and I came up with 115,000 for Medicare, but I know that we have salaries that are in grant lines, and my question to Brenda or Suzanne would be whether or not that Medicare still gets expensed to the town, or to the district, through the general fund, or if that gets expensed to the grant. I don't know if Brenda can answer that for me.
Unfortunately, that would be a Suzanne.
Okay. So that may be where that difference is of 30,000.
That 50,000 is the figure that I received from Suzanne.
Pat, speak in the microphone so we can all hear her.
I
Brenda.
heard you, but I'm not sure if other people did. Brenda, can you come up to the microphone? Thank you.
I just took the current salaries that are in the new budget and I multiplied it by the 1.045 that she had and the current Medicare rate of 4.5%, and I came up with $115,000. So I just didn't know if there was salaries in her computation that were paid through grants, because typically all the expense associated with that individual that's paid through the grant would go through the grant. But I don't know if the Medicare and
I don't
health
believe,
and all
I
that.
don't believe that it does.
Okay, so it's just the salary.
It's just the salary.
Okay,
That's
so that
correct.
would make sense.
I
why
can
that's
help with that
Yes.
because I write the grants,
Yes.
most of them.
So that's, I was like, I mean, it's a $30,000
Most of
difference, so
the
I
grants
just wanna
pay
make
for the
sure.
people.
Okay, and then the town pays for.
Sometimes a portion of the insurance,
Okay,
but as the grants
rest falls on the
dwindle, we
town.
keep the people support
okay.
and the budget picks up some of the health insurance or more of the health insurance.
So from a grant perspective then, are we covering roughly $200,000 in salaries through grants? Because that's about what I'm missing.
No.
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 Not that high.
Not that high.
So that may
We've
be
got about
some.
47,000 in the inclusive preschool.
Okay.
Folks, at this time, we'll let Pat call this full school committee meeting to order, same agenda, and
Thank you.
want to chair?
You can do it.
I'd like to call the complete school committee meeting to order. And David is going to continue because he is our money person on the committee. So nothing's any different. The agendas are exactly the same. Just a formality to make sure we can continue business if not all committee members could come.
So this may be a line to look at, but it's a small percentage. It's 1.45%. So we can take a look at what salaries lie in those grants and maybe give an updated number next week on that. Like I said, it's not huge dollars, but the calculation I came up with was a little bit different than what was on here based on the new salaries from the cuts and add backs that have been made. So these salaries in this budget times the Medicare rate is how I came up with my figure. So we can look a little further into that next week.
How many total staff, full-time equivalent staff reductions? How are you expressed? Sorry. How many staff reductions does this draft budget entail?
Pretty much indicated in all the notes.
Right. We put that beside the line items in each site budget.
Well, obviously, I don't always compute. I got the UE insurance spectacularly wrong, and I'm asking those who have worked on the budget for at least a ballpark. Last year it was 10, 11, 12. This year it is a number.
6 so far. 7.
I did that in 5 minutes.
There,
10.
I don't have all the
I just did it. I was sitting there.
All right, so we'll put that in the questions that we need to.
It's roughly 11 staff if you add up the full-time equivalent numbers. And that was a quick.
David, Pat or David.
Came up with 10, and I just
Is somebody
ballparked it.
making a list of questions that we need to address to have answers for when we come back to the next meeting?
I am.
Thank you.
I got one side of my notebook says notes, the facing page says questions.
So before we leave health insurance,
Mm-hmm.
do we have a spreadsheet?
Use the mic, please.
Oops, sorry, I forgot. Do we have a spreadsheet?
So there is a spreadsheet, and the total health insurance cost, I believe, that we spoke to yesterday at the meetings was $3,045,000, and basically what gets moved to school choice is the whole amount of school choice. That's what school choice covers, the health and life insurance. So whatever piece we can pull over to school choice, the difference sits in the general fund. And that's where that estimate is based on what we received in FY18, because I did not have this $831,000 figure in front of me. We were basing what we did off of FY18 if we didn't have FY19 numbers.
I'm just asking so that we are prepped when Mary Jane Handy comes and wants to go through it.
And I will sit with you guys when that happens, and we do have a spreadsheet, our payroll administrator, and that's where these figures came from, and that was part of the meeting on Monday with Brenda.
Do we have a GIC letter for
No.
FY19 yet?
No,
No.
I provided you with the documentation previously.
Right.
And it's an estimated, they've estimated a 5 to 7% increase. So I was aggressive and I went with 7% to make sure that we had enough.
Okay.
We do have a letter from Franklin Regional Retirement. So we do have the figures from Franklin Regional Retirement.
Did we
just
go
not-
7% across the board?
Yes.
Okay, that will work, because Hampshire is 4.7 and GIC is 9 point something. GIC is our retirees only.
Yes.
And that's not as difficult number to track. I mean, they give us a bill in the form of a letter annually.
Yes.
So, and I spent a little time this afternoon hoping that Tanya or somebody had made the mistake I made some months ago when looking at health insurance, which was failing to impute the fact that we pay 75%, not the whole bill. So the whole bill is 3 million something.
No, the 3 million is the district's entire exposure. Part of that gets coded to school choice, which is why the school choice number comes into play. That is our exposure for retiree and employee health insurance. That's what the district will pay. The reason there's only 2 million and change in the general fund budget is because that's what comes from the state funding and our other funding sources.
Right. The figures.
So
that-
it gets split between school choice and the general fund, so that's where the
The
numbers
figures
come
that
from.
Suzanne and I came up with for health and life insurance, between what she pays for payroll and I pay out of accounts payable for this year, again, estimating GIC at a 7% increase, going with the letter that we received from Franklin Regional Retirement. Suzanne built in 10 plans into the health and life insurance. The figure that we came up with was $3,287,123, of which, if you look at the figure that Ruth Miller had put originally in, it's changed since then, she had originally put in $2,406,031, which would mean that $881,092 was going to go to school choice. The question is, do we have $881,092 to put to school choice?
Yeah, and that's where, like I said, I took this is our current funds that we get from the state. This is the breakout of the funds that get deposited every month from Chapter 70, and we currently get $63,000 for that school choice. So I estimated $720,000 being a little conservative in case that number goes down a little bit. But the letter I have in front of me shows $831,000, so I think we should confirm how close those numbers are to enrollments for next year. If that's happened, I don't know.
Any questions? I have one, which is, are we double counting that revenue? Because on the estimated cherry sheet is school choice receiving.
Right.
And it is in the total estimated receipts, less the charges.
So the charges for tuition school choice charter school is actually in the general fund. That's the 744, 774, which I just mentioned needs to go up 22,000. The school choice funds that we get in, which I'm not sure why they were set up as a separate fund, currently go into a separate fund, and we code the health insurance over to that. My thinking this morning is all this revenue should be in the general fund, and the full health insurance budget should be in the general fund as well, and then you still have a balanced budget.
How does the committee like that idea?
That makes sense to me.
Well,
Yeah.
we've
I don't
been
know why
wanting
It's
it-
a little less like a shell game.
Yeah. We wanna see all the sort of.
There's no reason for the school choice to be in a separate fund if we're just moving general fund expenses to it.
I think
if
there
it's
may
all
be an
Chapter
underlying
70.
legal reason, but I see no reason
No.
why we couldn't vote to appropriate from to the general fund and keep our business someplace where we could try.
We
it
can
out.
check with the state on that, but that's just my thinking, so that all the whole numbers are all in one place.
Write that down.
So.
She's gonna check with the state.
Take a
Yeah, keep
comment
after me.
while you're writing there.
Yes, please do.
So a couple of years ago, and maybe it was 16, we got written up in the audit because we didn't have, charter school and school choice sending in as an expenditure in our, we had yet another separate little
Right,
thing
yeah.
that we could never see.
So that is now in the budget.
Exactly.
So I'll have to find out if the revenue can also go there, because that would make sense from a common sense standpoint and an accounting standpoint. But I can get back to you guys on that. Regardless, the funds are going in and out. It's just where they're getting.
And we've been written up
Line
about
item.
having a comprehensive budget document that shows all our revenue. Never picked up.
Committee, you have other questions then? The next meeting, well, John.
Oh, I have a question, and if we go through this, page by page, I'll save it, but it has to do with the health and life insurance. We're off like $729,000. It's a huge amount.
So that is where the school choice revenue comes into place, and that's where I was saying I estimated, based on what we're receiving currently from the state for school choice, $720,000 in revenue. So essentially what happens is a piece of the entire health and life insurance gets coded over to the school choice fund that is currently set up. So that's what covers the difference between the 3 million and the 2,000,006.
Right.
But the number I have in front of me that was just provided by Peggy from the most recent estimate from the state is 831,000. So that would essentially mean that the difference that we added to health and life insurance was 200,000. We could reduce that to 100,000. But I would, for good measure, like to confer with the state that this 831,000 is accurate and based on some sort of enrollment, because as we know, because of everything that's going on in the district right now, our enrollment numbers continue to decline. 100,000 is a big number. If we're going to be conservative, I would err on the side of caution and go maybe 50,000, because we don't want to end up in a revenue deficit situation like we did this year with the transportation that they promised us and we didn't get. So we'll have to look into that a little bit further. But this is a good number for right now with the estimates and based on what we actually received in FY18.
Okay, John.
To me, it's still mind-boggling that we're off $729,000 on that one line item.
Because it gets coded to a different fund.
So imagine.
when the bill
imagine
gets
the in-
paid,
the
it gets
invoice comes in,
separated.
It gets photocopied and split. Some of it's paid from the general fund. We got this fund balance report back in February. If somebody passed that to John. I mean, that's how many funds we have. It starts off with the general fund, and then there's about 20 or 30 more.
And this is where I was just saying that we should ask the state and make sure that we can include that school choice revenue in the general fund, because that's how it's done, and it was done in the town that I worked in. It wasn't put into a separate fund, because it really is general fund revenue, and then the expense side of that is budgeted in there also, and then everything's in one place instead of moving expenses to a different fund.
Just to get back to a $729,000 figure, I understand there's a 7% increase, so that only accounts for about $150,000 of that. There's $600,000 we're still off.
No.
Does that mean we have?
That gets
Can I
coded
try-
to another fund.
Can I try to explain
I
this?
don't know how else to explain it.
Let-
It's incorporated, it
Let-
goes.
Let me,
yeah.
so, a lot of health, the majority of health and life insurance is paid through the payroll department. Suzanne pays it. However, the retirees is paid through accounts payable. That's me. I get a bill in from Franklin Regional Retirement. It's 400, I don't have it right now, but we have the figure, we have that figure. It's $460,000. I do not charge that bill to the general budget. I charge that bill to the school choice line.
How much has that gone up since last year, that figure, the 460,000? How much of an increase was it?
I think it was about a $20,000 increase.
Well, it's still peanuts, we're still $600,000 off on.
So
So-
the way that accounting works in a district is you have your general fund budget, and then you have other funds that revenue comes in and expenses go out. They need to net to zero at the end of the year. The school choice tuition receiving that we get from the state goes in its own fund. So we'll say Fund 50, because I don't know it off the top of my head.
How much was our school choice off last year? How much less than the year before?
We're gonna get roughly 720 or 730,000 in FY18.
And how much in FY19?
And the amount I have in front of me is actually 831,000. Right, this figure, what I'm trying to explain to you is the 3,200,000 minus the 2,600,000 is that school choice revenue, because that piece of the entire health insurance will get coded to that Fund 50
I
when it
understand
comes
all
through
that,
as a
but
bill. That's why there's a difference.
This leads me to believe we're either really down on school choice, like 120 kids to make up $600,000, or our expenses are way up on our premium costs or our retirement costs. I don't understand how that line can be off
Yeah, I don't-
$729,000.
Can I finish explaining?
Can you estimate the total health insurance cost for just retirees for the year, or maybe fiscal 18? I mean, you mentioned the 400,000.
I do have that.
I think it was around $1 million.
So we used to get about $1 million in school choice.
So
and
we're
we used to-
estimating GIC at $676,240. Franklin Regional Retirement at $474,874. That's retirees. Those are paid through accounts payable. As I indicated, I pay the Franklin Regional Retirement and I charge the entire bill to school choice. The past 2 years, I have charged, we pay GIC in 10 months. I charge 8 of the 10 months to school choice. There is your difference that you're talking about.
And we used to get about $1 million in school choice in, so we earmarked that $1 million for retiree insurance out. Now that we don't get as much school choice in, part of that retiree has to be included on the general fund, so that's why
Correct.
it's bigger
Exactly.
than it was, if that helps at all.
Exactly.
The health and life insurance essentially is getting paid from two different pots, and that's why only 2,600,000 is in this budget, because the budget is only for your general fund.
I understand that, but that line item's still $729,000 we have to come up with.
It's going to be paid from school choice. That is a separate fund and separate revenues that come in to cover that are not included in the general fund revenue budget.
Well, if that's true, then we shouldn't have that much of a deficit if it's being paid out of another fund.
That fund is only covering that 720,000, that's what's estimated right now, that to be coming in to cover that. But based on the new proposal that I have in front of me, it's 831,000. So we may be able to decrease that line by another 100,000, but until we confer with the state that we're going to get $831,000 based on some sort of enrollment number or what they think we're going to get for school choice, I'm not comfortable decreasing that back to $2,506,000. That's the 831 that, that's, I have in front of me.
Build your budget on the governor, rather than, because in the House and then the Senate, and then you get,
Oh, so the difference between, are you referring to the difference between the 1,000,008 and the 2,000,006?
Well, that's even worse, that's $840,000.
Because in that original 1,876,000, there were 0 additional plans budgeted. So we budgeted 10 additional plans when we essentially have exposure for 50 or maybe a little bit less individuals that could come on our insurance at any given time. So that's why we've budgeted additional plans into that, because this year we only had 4 budgeted and we had 13 people come on. So we had 9 additional people come on to the health insurance that we did not budget for.
It wasn't budgeted accurately.
Yeah, it wasn't originally budgeted accurately. The numbers were provided to Ruth Miller, the superintendent, on multiple occasions with the figures that Brenda and Suzanne gave her, and she continued to budget a lower number. And that's what was brought to the school committee. So going forward, the school committee should really be asking for backup and computations like the spreadsheet that we said we can provide to you on the health and life insurance to prove those numbers out.
If we're cutting 10 positions, wouldn't that be $150,000 in savings?
This includes the positions that are cut. This is on the current employees that are going to be employed with us. That's how far under she had presented the numbers to you guys. And I don't know how else to say that, but I sat with Brenda and Suzanne almost every day I was in during the budget process, and they continued to tell her what the real number needed to be, and she continued to present you folks with a different number.
So as scribe, would somebody state the question I'm about to write down?
I still hadn't gotten the answer to it just now, exactly how many teachers were laying off. And
If
it
you-
is 10?
If you add it up on here, I believe it was 11.
Includes,
But that
I'd
includes
like a real
adminis,
number next
I don't think it's
meeting.
all, I don't think it's all teachers though. in
Oh.
the-
part of that's administrative staff.
I'd like a real number next meeting.
If I went through and added up, because in the column of each one of these budgets, as Gail mentioned, it says 0.5 reduced, 1 reduced, 2.4 reduced. Those add up to 11 staff. That's includes teachers, support staff, and administrative assistants at Warwick.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Good.
You're welcome. So our budget revenue number is local assessments and Chapter 70 state aid.
Correct.
And to get to the Chapter 70 state aid number, we look at a cherry sheet, or in this case, an
Yes.
estimated cherry
Yep.
sheet. And using the governor's number, it's 4.7 million.
4.8 net of charges is what I have in front of me.
All right, so, but to get to that number, we have the school choice receiving tuition less the school choice sending tuition. How can we spend out of that special fund? It seems to me like we're already toting it up as a general fund revenue, and then we're popping it over into a siloed account and spending it again. All right.
And I did not
Yeah.
bring my phone in with me that has the actual
I'm just
FY19
gonna put that
revenue.
down as a question
Yeah.
that I have special needs with.
Do you have the FY19 revenue spreadsheet that was created for the actual revenues? Because if you take out that 831,000, you would get 4,000,007, which I believe is what's in the original revenue budget for Chapter 70. I just looked at it before I came in. Can I see, does that have FY19 on it? So the chapter 70 that's on here is 4,142,000, which is what the original budget, the governor's budget was, as well as the 507,258 for transportation and the 18,582 for charter school reimbursement. So those figures, the only three figures that are in the general fund revenue are the education piece. When you're looking at the governor's budget, the school choice receiving tuition is not part of that revenue budget. So if you take the 5,570,000 or 5,000,005 and take out that
Okay,
800,000, it gets 4,007,000.
We're still on the questions portion of the, yes.
Dave?
Yes.
So if we hadn't have added in the 10 reductions of savings of $150,000 on the health and life insurance line, we'd be almost $1 million off on that line item. 900,000 to $1 million.
That's
Wow.
correct.
That's incredible.
And it was originally about 650 to 700,000 off on the multiplications it was proposed to Ruth. The reason for the addition to what that would be off is those 10 plans that we're budgeting. If we don't budget those plans, we will 100% be in expense over expenditure next year. There would be no way to avoid that because you always have people coming on to health insurance with change of statuses, with the number of employees we have in the district.
So, you're gonna find out the answer to that.
I'm
all
gonna
of that.
find out about the 831,000, because that
Okay,
will
and-
dictate what we can move to, over to the school choice or remove out of the general fund, or if we can just include this revenue in the general fund revenue.
John, can you present your concern to her so we can find out exactly what this number is? How you came up with that number and why? So that we're not in the dark again?
So this 2,000,006 that's in the general fund right now makes the health and life insurance number whole that has been proposed by Suzanne and Brenda together and double-checked to make sure it includes all the current employees, and it's split between the two funds. So the insurance is covered right now. We may be able to decrease what comes out of this line if we have to keep the school choice in a separate fund. If we don't have to keep that school choice in a separate fund, the revenue and the full expense would be moved into the general fund and they would net. So it's not gonna change this at all unless we have an additional 100,000, but I need to confer with the state on that to make sure that's a
Probably
good
won't, but
number.
when we have a member of the school committee that really is questioning that we could be 900 to 1,000 to
No.
$1 million off, we need to listen to that and make sure that he's wrong.
I got the question down. We will run this down, and I may have an idea why these things are segregated, and against my better judgment, I'm gonna share that. I believe that the tuition and charter receiving fund is
Don't just quote, make sure you
is
know.
the discretionary fund of a superintendent. That is, it is not the school committee's to decide. I believe it is the superintendent's discretionary. So this district has a history of in the past, voting that money to the budget. When Ruth got here, she said, this isn't the right way to do it. It's supposed to. She never exercised that little bit that I hope is maybe is fiction, but I read that someplace. We'll have to, that'll be for our questions.
So John, what is your actual question then? I don't know if I answered
Oh,
why
well-
the difference or why it's not fully budgeted in the general
I
fund.
kind of get it, but my follow-up question is it possible for the last 3 years that this line item's been off so far that could be our $1 million deficit just in that one line item?
As I have
Pretty close.
spoke to in multiple meetings of this, that is the bulk of our over expenditures in the general fund has been health and life insurance and our substitute line. And that's where these items have been continuously under budgeted and not looked at close enough. And that is from me going backwards and looking at them and not having the plans in the budget to cover our exposure for people that come on during the year.
If I might add something, You are correct. Tanya is correct. But I want to make it known that the principals accurately budgeted their substitute lines, and they were consistently cut 2 years in a row.
Right. Yeah, when I talk to the budget
Not
not
by
being
them.
budgeted, it's
Thank
been
you.
by the superintendent, not by the administrative staff.
Peggy?
I just want to say that's what we need to remind ourselves as we're looking back at what is listed in the FY18 column. That's what was budgeted. There's not a line in there for what the actual expenditures
Was,
are.
yes.
So comparing to what was budgeted, if the amount that was
The
budgeted
budget was wrong.
then it makes, it's
So
irrelevant.
Peggy, when I sat with the administration and Gail on Monday, I have on my laptop the comparison I did what the FY18 actuals versus 19 is, and that's where a lot of those numbers were changed to match what our true need was, and that was what I had mentioned that we needed to do. So that is the process that happened between the administration, Gail, and myself the last 2 days. But yes, looking at the FY18 budget really is irrelevant, because if we look at that and try to budget to it, we're just gonna repeat what we did before.
So John, to your point, this February of this current year fund balance report shows in February that the school choice account had been hit for very nearly 700,000, and in February was 114,000 underwater. Because that was paying the GIC bill, which that's a lump sum bill,
No.
it probably was not continuing to accumulate. but-
GIC I pay monthly.
Oh,
That is something that we used to always pay in one lump sum. And that is one thing that Ruth Miller had said, that we couldn't handle the cash flow to do that. And she had me write a letter to the state and telling them that we would break it down over 10 months. And they never batted an eyelash. They graciously take my payment every month. So we do not pay that in a lump
Okay.
sum, which is why I'm able to, I charge 8 months to school choice, 2 months to the health and life insurance line.
And-
Or receipts for.
And the receipts don't end until the end of the year. So whatever is in that line though that's overspent at the end of the year, if our insurance does end up being more than what we got in school choice, those insurance expenses will have to be coded back to the general fund, which would increase our FY18 deficit by that difference.
John, are you
So
comfortable
that's
with
one.
the answers that your information you're getting?
I just think we're chronically underestimated or underfunded our health and life insurance
I think you're right.
exposure, and that's our $1 million deficit right there in 3 or 4 years.
Part of the $1 million deficit we have right now, you guys have to understand, is 250 roughly from the school lunch fund, which will go away over 3 years when the towns pay that back. But until that gets paid back, like I mentioned, that is still currently a deficit, because we have paid out those funds in cash to cover those expenses, and until we recoup that from the towns, that deficit will be part of it. And additional 140 was the circuit breaker. So once those funds are replaced, if you take those out of the equation, the town itself, or not the town, I keep referring to the town, I apologize, the general fund of the district is actually about 750,000. The rest of it lies in 2 other special revenue funds, if you will, and if those are not whole, they become a responsibility of the district until the revenues come in to wash that deficit out.
You've also noticed in the reports that I've given you every month that health and life insurance is considerably overspent
Yeah.
this year as well.
Any idea how the health and life insurance line item fiscal year 18 to 19 went down 356,000? Why we were estimating it
That-
was going to go down?
Well, like I said, when Ruth Miller gave you those estimates, that definitely should have been a red flag to you guys to go back for supporting documentation.
I can tell you that I have spoke with 2 different members
sorry.
on the school committee more than once, indicating, please take a look at the health insurance line, that there's a problem with the health insurance line. And I've been saying for that for the past 4 months.
We were also instructed that we could not speak to.
That's right.
central
well,
office
to
staff.
go,
Yep.
actually, to go through the superintendent, and
But currently, we need to move forward with a budget that's going to supply us with the coverage of the expenses that we need. And I'm confident that the $3,287 that Brenda and Suzanne have collaboratively provided is sufficient to cover our expense along with the 10 additional plans in the budget, based on the 7% increase.
So we have our staff members here. I wonder if they would care to red flag or suggest any items that the committee ought to be asking questions about or look at. Anything in addition?
I think what we tried to do is present everything clearly, accurately in regards to numbers, and explanations where we felt you might need explanations or want them. So I think the questions need to come from if you have questions.
Okay. Peggy?
So if we jump to the shared staff budget,
Which staff?
the shared teacher salaries are now approximately half of what we budgeted for 18. I need somebody to make me, page 8 of the new list.
This is part of the restructuring and some of the staff that got moved around. When we met on Monday, we listed out the employees that were still included in that, so that 232,000 is a good number. There was also a mentorship figure that was in that got moved to a district mentoring line that needs to be set up as its own account, that was expressed as a concern by the administration also.
And
So
we clearly
moved
heard
that.
the school committee and the public say that specials are important. So what we did is we restructured to save money, but also still have specials at the elementary school level.
That's accomplished by fewer staff doing more duties and spending less time at the elementary schools. Is that correct?
Sharing and consolidating. And we,
What does it mean to specifics? I mean, those are great words. Can you give us an example?
Use the mic, please.
are you going to ask it so in the mic, or do you want me to just answer the question?
Go ahead.
Okay. So there was, without obviously talking about names of people, there was a retirement. We restructured, so some of, basically, I'm just trying to figure out the easiest way to explain this. So the times of specials at the elementary schools varied. So what we did is we made specials 30 minutes consistently at all 4 elementary schools, and were able to do that and still save specials.
Thank you.
So they did some scheduling to make this work so that the students don't lose out on their services. We maintain staff to provide the services to the students, and it's more efficient and hopefully reserves our population.
Okay. Go ahead, Sharon.
I want to compliment the administrative team for all the work they've done. Some of it, most of it's thankless work, but I certainly appreciate your straightforward answers. Thank you very much.
So committee, does it make sense for us to go through page by page? All right. All right, so let's start with account 0, district administration. Yeah, the first page. And so we've reduced superintendent to half-time. and cut-
David, could you please put the mic down so that your voice goes into it?
You need to rile me up and I get loud anyway. So we have a half-time superintendent, half the money. We have eliminated the assistant superintendent early in the year.
We've eliminated superintendent's travel, which is unrealistic.
Uh-huh.
All right, so noted.
We did keep in the central office travel, so that we did feel that some of the superintendent's travel could get billed to the central office travel.
That's still not.
I seldom ever put in for travel. I go back and forth between schools and all, but I've never put in for travel. Suzanne rarely does, so, that 500, Suzanne will probably spend out maybe $80 or $100 of it. The rest of it would be designated pretty much between the business manager and the superintendent.
And typically that's in the superintendent's contract.
That's right.
So that's something that we will have to negotiate.
And the $500 that's in there is based off actual expenses spent in FY18. So some of these that you see reduced from what Ruth had originally put in there for the budget or less than FY18's budget is because we only spent so much in FY18, and I didn't think it was reasonable to have a budget higher than actual expenditures from the prior year unless there was a reasonable explanation for it, for something that was going to be added.
So can somebody comment on why the council fees went up? Were special needs legal fees?
I can.
Yeah.
We pay $12,000 a year annually right now. That's the contract that we have this year. I don't have a contract yet for next year for Dupre. We also have we have acquired actuarial services, and I know that Tanya can address that, but we have to use attorneys for actuarial services now. So Tanya was actually able to retrieve the figures that we will have next year from the lawyers for the actuarial. And we also, our special education department also has legal fees.
Okay, so we can, I talked with Fred at last Tuesday's meeting. He said 12 is their number.
And that's what I based
correct.
it on.
$1,000 a month.
This is an accurate figure.
I spoke to Russell today, or he emailed me, we emailed back and forth, and he said it is it's $6,000 if he does actual fees, and the 12,000, and the 12,000 is their regular, so that would add up in my book to 18 and not 60.
So they're not engaged to do our actuarial services for us right now. We have another firm, which is a very long name, and I actually have an engagement letter in my email for the next 2 years' services. They have been the ones providing us those GASB 75 compliance actuarial services for the last 2 or 3 years. Once again, Ruth has failed to budget those, unfortunately, and that's something where I think when Sue talked to you guys being educated about your guys' responsibilities, I think understanding what those compliance needs are is important so that you guys understand that the administrative staff is accurately budgeting. So we had a $1,100 cost in the FY18 council fees for the in between years. You have a roll forward evaluation, so that is less. So FY19 is a full evaluation year at $2,750, and then the following year will be $1,375. This year's was $1,180, and that is mandated for our OPEB, which is our post-retirement benefit calculation that is done for our auditors to put that in our audited financial statements.
Is there a built-in figure here somewhere for professional dues and things of that nature for the superintendent?
There is not, and that's a good question.
Professional administration dues and subscription, we have $2,000.
It's about
Where is it?
halfway down the page.
Halfway down
Is
the
that
page.
for central office staff or is that for administration?
It's for
That's for
administration.
Thank you.
administration.
We talked about that today.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, and I wasn't there this morning. So that includes principal, superintendent,
Thank you.
and business manager, okay.
It does not include principals.
No, it's central office,
Superintendent.
business
Okay.
manager, superintendent.
I got three people talking and I have no idea what was said.
All right, I'm going to call on you next, okay?
Oh,
All
no,
right.
I'm just clarifying,
Would you like her to repeat?
please.
And the principals' dues and subscriptions are in their school budgets. this does not cover a school principal.
And I
It's
do
central
believe,
office.
yeah, and I think I actually was the one that gave you the 2,000 figure based on what was spent in FY '18.
Thank you.
Could somebody discuss the unemployment taxes? We have 50,000. This is maybe we should be adjusted based on layoffs. We're contemplating 10. Has that been calculated roughly?
We did it.
So I believe the figure that I had that's on here takes into account the current staffing. Once again, that needs to be confirmed, but based on the .005 rate, which is 0.5% for the unemployment, the 50,000 is accurate based on the mandated step increases and stuff that are in the budgets, and that was calculated by Suzanne.
The shared health supplies figure, I think, is grossly underfunded. The health offices don't have enough money in their budget to purchase supplies to keep them going through the school year, such as Band-Aids, Tylenol, Advil, all of the ACE bandages, all of those kinds of things. What is in their closet, they're going to have to use, and when that's gone, it's gone. With this figure,
Once again, I believe when we went through these figures yesterday, we looked at what FY '18's actuals are, but I'd be happy to pull up my laptop in the midst of the conversations and verify that for you.
that would be great if you would. Thank you.
Before we flip the page, we plugged in a number for our part-time business manager before we actually had a person. We have to negotiate that salary and we have to negotiate the number of hours.
I was going to bring that up when Ruth originally budgeted this was for 20 hours, and when they reposted it as full-time, that number was not adjusted. So that will have to be taken into consideration once we figure out hours.
30 hours and
I don't know that that is an appropriate conversation for right now, but it will be, have to take
are we gonna
into
refer that to
consideration before next
negotiation time?
Tuesday, yeah. I think that needs to be taken care of later, but that is a good point, and I did bring that up, but because we don't have the numbers, we can't accurately put that in there right now.
All right, so can we circle that one?
same thing with the
Also,
superintendent.
I was gonna say that also we need for the superintendent and his salary and the transportation also.
And is our minder in here somewhere?
Yes.
Where's that?
Right under the business manager.
Tanya, I can tell you that when I ran an expenditure, my last expenditure report that I just happen to have in this book is from April. At that time, our shared health supplies, we had budgeted $2,128 for this year, and we are $52.10 in the hole.
Okay, so we
As of
did
April.
spend more than the 2128.
Accurate.
So maybe we should recommend increasing that to 2,200 as we go through this then.
I do know that all the schools took huge cuts in their supply lines when we were told that we needed to cut. So to make it equitable, so to speak, all supply lines, we took a look at all supply lines. It's not to say, it comes back to that whole thing, we're not saying that some of these things are what we supported, but when we had to come up with money, we had to come up with cuts. This is what we did.
I understand, but when I walk into a school and see a donation box for health supplies, it's a little unnerving.
Well, it might be also for pens, pencils, and paper too, so.
Hey,
On central maintenance tools, near the bottom of page 1, we had budgeted 3,000. I'm not exactly sure how that line works.
I can answer that.
Okay.
This is a line item that's old in the budget, historically old. So Tim and I did the facilities budgets in each site, and that I double checked, and that is not, it's not needed. It's a true cut. It won't be expended or overexpended.
And he did confer that on Monday when we were
Yes.
in our meeting.
all right, well, we're ready to turn to the backside of district administration. exposure, our actual potential exposure, and how we're funding this.
Would you like us to provide you Suzanne's spreadsheet once we have that in hand to the school committee so you guys can further verify? Would that be,
I think it would be helpful.
I mean, I think that's something,
I did an analysis of incenting our employees to not take our insurance, and I did an analysis of, this one's my friend, of our health insurance and incenting our employees not to take our insurance, to go on their spouses. That's where I learned the significant fact of our exposure, that we have 50 of 180-something employees who are eligible for insurance who are not on our insurance. So we would have paid everybody an incentive to do what they're already doing, and we would have had to have more than 20 units leave us, and just to break even. But having all that data, the actual letter, copies of invoices, meant this afternoon, I was hoping to discover we'd made a mistake and we're toting up all of the expense of health insurance, and we were going to get to reduce that by a quarter. I was pretty quickly, based on that information, be able to test that and say this health insurance total expense line is a pretty good one.
I'll work with them tomorrow to put it into an Excel spreadsheet that's easily deciphered and broken out, fairly simple for you guys, so you can see that.
So the next line's employee separation costs, and I now understand that's money that we provide retirees. I wonder if we ought to look at that one harder and consider increasing it, because what happens when we lay off teachers is we always lay off the least costly teachers who have, in general, who have graduated most recently and are not as high up on the step scale. State government in the past has, at times of budget shortfalls, pushed early retirement. We ought to cost out what it would cost us to incent teachers to retire early, and it would allow us to retain lower paid staff members who end up getting cut. I don't know if it works. I looked at the health insurance incentive thing, and it didn't. I think that this would bear modeling at a time like this.
And I don't know that we have the time to do that
Yeah.
within the FY19 budget, but I think it's certainly something that we could look at for FY20 as we continue to come up against funding shortages or losing students, et cetera, when we do the next year's budget.
So is this the line that is the unemployment insurance, or the cost of that? What is this?
Now, that is, in our collective bargaining agreements, that they include money that is split between retired teachers. I don't want to go too deep into exactly
Well, I mean,
what
I know
the-
teacher contracts, so you don't have to.
Please use the mic.
Yeah. So I understand teacher contracts. I don't need you to talk about the contract. I just want to know, what does the 35,000 represent? Is it unused sick days? Is it?
It is actually. So it's
Okay.
unused vacation and sick time, or any contractual obligations for someone when they retire.
Yeah.
There are a couple people that are retiring this year, and actually when we had our meeting on Monday, Bob Clancy was able to give us some information about what is actually in that line. So yes, that is the unused sick and vacation time for anyone that's retiring in the next fiscal year, and that's how that figure was come up with. And
Great.
I will see if I can find out, exactly who that covers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. This is a different question.
Okay.
All right. Is there somewhere hidden in here, or not hidden, hopefully? I signed a paper on Friday that Ruth wants to retire from our district, which is going to cost us some money. Do we have money in there somehow to pay that?
her current vacation and sick time, I believe, is being paid out in this current fiscal year.
Exactly.
So that wouldn't be additional cost. The only thing that would be additional, excuse me, would be the insurance.
Okay. All right, so just the insurance, all right.
Has she met all the obligations to be able to retire?
I don't know if this is an appropriate conversation for an
Wow.
open public meeting.
I guess you're
Just a
right.
reminder.
I'm going to put that in our questions pile.
Thank you.
But from a financial standpoint, for this line, it wouldn't need to be included in next year's budget for what that particular budget line covers.
The contract includes some money that is owed retiring teachers, depending on how many of them retire, it's split different ways. Where does that obligation appear?
I don't know what that.
Isn't
I'll
that
have
part of
that
separation cost? I believe, I
New book?
will check. I think.
That's a question, because
It's a good
that
question.
would be a question for our payroll for
Right.
Suzanne. So
It
that would be a question.
Potentially could be in this separation cost.
I'll see if
but
I
that's
can get a
question.
calculation from Suzanne tomorrow that adds up to that 35,000 that we can provide the committee with to verify that number.
I note for food service, we had at 50, it now has 85, which includes the 50,000 subsidy and a part-time food service director.
We're still on the hot seat here.
Oh, do you want an answer to that?
No, I think.
So I'm just gonna speak to this real quick, and this is just my recommendation. I wasn't part of the original budget, so like I said, this is all just professional opinion. I'm not yet the business manager, I'm just doing this, whatever. Based on how we're currently running with the school lunch, and if in the towns, I believe, have all four voted, correct me if I'm wrong, to cover our deficit, from what the current administration and assistants are saying, we are actually probably going to come closer to breaking even this year. If you look at the years that we have overspent, I don't believe any single year has gone over 30,000. So I would recommend to assist in covering this deficit before we go to the towns or cut anybody else's jobs, that we would decrease the 50 piece of that to 30. And then also have conversations with Gail and look to other districts that are for the food service manager salaries to figure out what that really needs to be if we're hiring part-time and what kind of hours we're looking at.
I have done that
Right,
previous
and that's- yeah.
to you joining us.
Yes.
So I have checked around at salaries, and one district recently hired a full-time person. I checked with somebody else. Another district I'm in communication with is about to hire a full-time person. I'm hopeful that, I'm fairly certain, let's put it that way, that that's plenty of money for a half-time person, should we be able to find someone who's willing to work half-time. There have been applicants.
So the 35,000 piece of
Yes.
that is, yeah.
Could you speak to the reducing the $50,000 subsidy, because I saw a few heads wagging and I would join them. I've not seen anything, and we've seen plenty of reports that weren't accurate, but I've not seen anything that says we're break even. I've seen a report this year that says we're 40,000 underwater. I've seen another adjusted report that said we're 20,000 this year underwater. So the question is, the timing of our recording of income, but we owe the towns no future lunch deficit. This is not the
Right.
place to go back to
So-
old ways.
I will say a few things, but I will say first that what the school committee told the towns is that you would put $50,000 in
Okay.
here for the lunch budget, so that's the first thing I want to say. The next thing is that I was prepared to, and am prepared to bring data to you to show you what we've done this year, show you our continued restructuring for next year, and how much, not that we'll save, but that you won't spend with the restructuring, And I did not bring that to the last full school committee meeting because your agenda was so long. So it's ready, it just is coming to you in this month's meeting. And I am going to say that we are breaking even, and I think by the time I redo, because obviously I'm going to update the data for this month, that we could be in a small amount of profit.
What was that?
I'm not repeating that.
Gail, have you, as there's no revenue in the summertime?
That is correct. We do not qualify. Some of our neighboring towns, as you might see posters of or advertisements in the newspaper, run summer, they call them, I'm not making this up, they call them summer feeding programs. And our neighboring towns all have those. We do not qualify with our free and reduced lunch percentage to offer a summer meals feeding program. And if we did, you would need a full-time food service director because it is a great deal of work, paperwork, organization, hiring, and expenditures.
So I guess my question is, do we have to keep that 50,000 then, because that was the stipulation of the town's funding?
That's the school committee's decision.
Oh, that's what so that would be my question to the school committee.
I think we're already doing it at least for a couple of years to see how our improvements work out. I mean,
And that's fine, I'm just looking for areas and recommendations to you guys to think about.
I think we need to keep that 50,000 in there because we told the towns we would do it. We need to keep our word.
Sounds good to me.
Any more questions about district administration, Fund 0?
I would just make the note next to the,
Yes.
oh, sorry.
I'm just wondering about the rental lease of equipment numbers.
The reason that number's higher than last year is because it's in consistency with what we're actually spending.
Right.
In
It was-
equipment,
right.
in that, yeah, so it's based on
A
actual
lot of it is the
needs.
copier, but it was, again, another line item that was under budgeted for.
Oh,
Gail, we met long ago about printers and copiers, and there were a number of leases and such. Is there anything that we're continuing to make payments on that the contract's out and could go away?
We have, Brenda and I volunteered to take on the copier challenge, is what I call it, because there was no one that was doing that. There were many people before that said they were going to do it, and they didn't. So Brenda and I took it on, and we have consolidated a little bit and gotten better deals.
Can I say something before you?
well, I just wanted to say thank you because that's a number I've been watching.
I know.
And I was like, come on, thank you.
It's very expensive. It's just one of those things that's very expensive.
When we have staff taking on extra duties like this is the spirit of the old pioneer. Thank you very much.
Before we move on to the next school, I would just ask the school committee to put a plus 22,000 in the tuition charter school line, because we do have a proposed, the proposed budget was the 744, 774, but it's looking like the Senate and House is 766. So I would put plus 22,000 with a question mark to the state to find out when we will know what that final number is, because we would need to incorporate that. I will say, though, that is one of the lines that I mentioned before. It's an assessment against state revenue. So if that goes over, we are not going to get penalized, but I certainly don't want to add to a deficit, allowable or not, that we currently have in the district. So I think if we properly budget that, that will help us eliminate a deficit, even if it's a legal deficit.
So if we moved everything into that line, we'd be okay?
No.
so
Nice
what is-
try.
what is
Nice
that
try.
number? Just
766, 678.
678?
Yes.
So this is basically a school district snow and ice line.
Essentially, because it's this is an assessment that is a charge against your state revenue, and because those fluctuate on numbers that we don't necessarily have hard numbers for, I think that's why the state allows for that. And towns and school districts budget that differently across the state.
Any members have any comments or questions for the return page?
It changes our bottom line on that page, right?
Yes, it does.
What's our bottom line on that?
You'll see it's in the bold.
It's in, right, it's there.
Oh, the 269.
It's the bold number.
So that would, oh, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just clarifying that we needed a new bottom line number.
Yes, we would need to add 22,000 to both the revised and the 269 number. So it'd be 4,246,489 and 291,756 would be the deficit in the district administration line.
Say that again.
291,756. And I know 774 minus 678 is not exactly $100, but I'm rounding here.
All right, let's turn to Bernardston. Do you have any questions about the Bernardston line?
I do.
Go ahead, Sue. Use the mic, though.
I will.
Use the mic.
Sorry, give me a minute. I'm working off of papers I had last week that I worked on, and now I saw there were new papers for this week. So I'm just comparing as I go. I'm good.
I want to just make a statement. When we are on site budgets and you see reduced one classroom teacher, I can't give you hard facts because obviously things fluctuate over the summer, but when you see that a reduced classroom teacher, class sizes will increase.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
The classroom instructional assistant line, can someone just explain the note to me? It's partway down, classroom instructional
Just
assistant.
to reflect assignment.
So it's actual
classrooms.
assignments.
Right.
And with the sped line, there's actually a reduction of 1.0 FTE as well, that should be noted there.
So the total between the classroom instructional and the
And the
special needs net out to the same. So they just moved them where they should actually
Thank
be.
We're trying
So
to
when Suzanne charges them,
accurate.
we won't be over in one and under in another.
Thank you.
If I remember right, our policy says that we will have less, let me see, no more than, is it 25 or 27 in a classroom? Does this still keep to those numbers as best they can?
Right now,
Not aware of that written anywhere.
I don't know
Yeah,
if that's
it's in the
right.
policies book. Don't ask me where, but it's in there somewhere. I don't think I was,
In the early ed manual, I want to say it's 24 is the number in that,
okay, I can't remember.
but I don't believe for any other classroom.
Yeah.
Bernardston has 28 in sixth grade,
Early ed manual indicates 16 for early ed.
or kindergarten.
Oh, okay.
Kindergarten, I think is 24.
And to cut this great amount of money, we have to reduce classroom teachers. We, no one wants to. No one wants to.
Sharon?
Oh, excuse me. On the substitute line, is that $37,450 based on what you've done in previous years, or?
It's based on accurate actual spending.
Thank you.
And it was proposed to be much greater than it was, and it was cut.
There are 2 leaves.
Thank you.
I didn't
There
hear.
are, we know that there are 2 leaves for partial year next year.
Thank you.
I just want to say how reassuring it is to have people at the table who are talking about our actual expenses. I've never worked on a budget where that wasn't one of the columns on the page. So in the future, could we see those columns when we're working on budgets? Like, that should just always be what we're looking at. What was our actual spending versus what we plan to spend next?
And I
Not
think
just
next year
what we
we can do
budgeted.
that.
All I've ever seen is what we've budgeted, not what we've spent. So thank you.
Well, and hopefully
And
going
no-
forward, our budget will exceed what we're actually spending.
Right.
And the comparison that I did in making recommendations myself was the FY18 actuals with what's currently encumbered against the FY19 budget, and making recommendations
Right. I
either
was
to
just going
increase
to say that.
or decrease the expenditures. Because like I said, it doesn't make sense to budget when we haven't been spending that money, especially when we need it in other lines. So that's where there were some cuts in some schools and in the district.
The figures that were given for budget were based on actual figures.
Thank you.
Yes.
Down to the library supplies, what was the reason for the increase there?
It's not an increase.
Or you
It's
level
a
funded it? Okay,
decrease.
yeah.
It was originally budgeted for $750 for FY19, and it's $250. And again, in those many times that we met, we needed to go at everything and try to be equitable. So you'll see that library supplies have a little bit in them. You know, we managed to keep the part-time in some cases, or the library assistants, but for a little bit of supplies.
Thanks.
But again, you have to make cuts.
Absolutely.
I think Megan wants to speak to the library.
Okay, well, not specific to the library, but just in general, the other challenge of looking back at the FY18 numbers is that last year we made a lot of cuts as well. So we really undercut our spending needs with the idea that that was a one-year Band-Aid. And so we are moving forward with already a lower number that is realistic to work with in our schools for different supply line items. So if there are, like, for example, you might see an increase in the library, that's because the year before it was really
Right.
underfunded. But again, now we're having to cut again. So
Thank
I
you.
just want that to be, that perspective to be there as well.
Thank you.
In my comparison of the budget that we have in front of us, what I've been doing is I've been going back to the March principals asking budget to look at the changes from then. Does that principals asking budget represent any healthier perspective than what you just referenced? I don't know if you can remember back that far. There's been a lot of iterations of the budget since then. It's the one that was 14,588,841.
That included another classroom teacher.
It was the one that had
difficulty-
first cut, second cut, so there was your asking budget, the first one you brought to the budget committee, and first cuts and second cuts after that. So I've been going back to that one, hoping that that's at least a healthy enough perspective on what you might think you need. Is that true?
I just think somewhat, that asking was not a wish list.
Right.
Column, it was being conservative.
Okay.
And at times, when we all sat and worked on the budget, and I have all of them here, but I just can't put my hand on the one that you're referring to. But we sat as a whole group, I can't even count the number of times. And then when we got to this meeting, the document that we had created as a group was different
Yeah, I hear you.
in some areas.
So the Bernardston Elementary goes over to the next page.
I do want to just point out that we did receive projected figures from our representative from Eversource, which I had provided previously, but they had not been updated in the budget. So when we went through yesterday and today, all of the light and power with the exception of Warwick, because it's a different company. All are based on the projections from Eversource for next year.
And in addition to that, I had a conversation with Tim, who I deferred to set up our net metering credit, and he worked on that with David's suggestions as well. And he told me that after it's set up, and probably in about a year, we'll start to see $20,000 of, kickback, so to speak, because we set up net metering credit.
But it won't be.
Essentially
20.
discounts. And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
scheduled to start at least a year ago at Warwick School is a similar net meter credit purchase agreement. And that will reduce Warwick's electrical charge by 22%. And that project, the town of Warwick's on that project too. And I think it's a matter of a month or two. We also have potential of $84,000 worth of energy savings across Pioneer, Northfield and Warwick, subject to 2 Department of Energy Resource competitive grants. I've communicated with the agency this week to say, please don't fail to award Warwick. This talk of closing the school is unlikely, and Warwick will go into it with its eyes open. There's a potential energy savings of $84,000 over 3 campuses, and that's through betterments so that we consume less energy. And then we're also talking about these net meter credit. And there's a project on the table. We should bring that on the next agenda because that requires school committee vote for the superintendent to sign. So that would, that's counting chickens that haven't arrived yet. But the net meter credit purchase is a real deal. They do take an awful lot of time. I'd say, based on my experience, 3 or 4 years is more like it. But
So is the 84,000 you're talking to, is that the Green Communities grant?
Yes.
Okay, right.
And there is just, and this has been mentioned to all of you before, but there is an energy committee within the district, representation of all 4 towns, and Tim Brandel is on that as well, representing the district as a whole, and working in all the schools to create energy savings.
I'm not sure if it's available to school districts or not, but I do know when I was in Ashburnham, we received, and I don't know if it was part of the Green Communities or a separate grant, but we had a $20,000 grant, I think separately, that was for conversion over to LEDs. So that may be something that the school committee or
We've done that.
Oh, okay.
It's
you
been
guys
done
have-
in all buildings.
Okay.
How many years ago?
I don't know, it was different buildings, at least 4 years
Yeah.
ago.
It was staggered.
It was.
Oh, wow. It was a try.
okay to move ahead now to Y.
Peggy, I believe the reduction in principal salary is something that was negotiated between Bob and the superintendent. Were you able to confer that? There. Okay. So is that 10,000 a good number or no? Okay.
Bob, when you say it's fine, go like this, not like this.
Can you explain to us why that was decreased from 20,000 so that the community understands?
Yes, this is also not a discussion for an open
Okay.
public
Right.
meeting. Just a reminder, again, from Gail.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
So only in its relevance to the fact that we're apparently cutting the administrative assistant to half-time. So, and if we have a principal that's not there more than he is, who's minding the store?
I could speak with authority to what, a similar thing is happening in Warwick, and my understanding is that the Title I teacher is going to do the tutoring in the office, and that the nurse will, who's full-time, will also keep an eye on it, and Warwick's going to upgrade the building so it joins the other schools with a buzzer lock system, so it's not so manual.
There are many people, especially in the two smaller buildings, that answer the phone and wear, as we all do, multiple hats. There's a little bit of flexibility. I know that the person that does the food service at Pearl Road's very part-time is up, when she's upstairs, she helps, she assists with the door.
Okay.
With the small schools, being from Leiden, my kids went to Leiden years ago. It's a team effort. It's a
Yep.
family, it's a team effort.
Yep.
Everybody pitches in.
I just didn't want to.
We just want to make sure that we're sufficiently funding for minimum needs of these schools, so thank you
John.
for that question.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out the total bottom line. Off to the right, it says it's $1,500, and it should be $35,000
Where are you? What is
at the end of the
Last
line.
page.
the end of that?
He's jumping ahead.
It said it's only $1,500 difference, but it's $35,000,
That's right.
more or less.
Oh, it just is before you.
I don't know why that's there.
15 is the most recent.
That $1,500 difference is from what was in that revised column originally. So that column that was proposed to you in the meeting prior to this, I took that and that's how I calculated what we actually cut. So that $1,500 included, I believe, a $500, I have to remember what we did yesterday. Oh, the $1,500 is in the classroom instructional line that changed from 18,507 to 20,007, and that was with discussions with Brenda about what is funded, and also with pre-K moving over to BES, the $1,500 that would have been covered by the preschool grant will no longer be available to cover that line.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we note the change in service delivery at Pearl Roads, where this budget has pre-K going to Bernardston, and this has 6th grade going to Bernardston. Folks ready to move on to the next budget? All right, next is Northfield.
Thank you, Megan. Well, thank you. I just saw a 0 on a travel line.
The
There are
teacher
multiple
salary
people-
line?
There are multiple people that optioned to do that.
Our principal at Warwick did as well.
Thank you for everyone.
Another thank you for the pioneer spirit. Our teachers have done this types of things for years. It's wonderful to see administration stepping up and helping the district so much. Thank you.
Can somebody explain the teacher line?
Megan, could you comment on this? You're welcome to come and join us.
So we are reducing 2 teachers, which will increase our class sizes. At this point, potentially between probably a 6th grade class of 26 to 27 students. We do have some people that are still coming for tours, so there's some question marks in terms of our enrollment for next year. But that would be one place where 2 classes would be combined into 1. And another grade would be 3rd going into 4th grade. We had 26, we lost 1 during the year,
We're anticipating a reduction of 1 to 2 just for moving out of district, and so that would be combined in one class as well. Likely to be 24 students. That is without any knowledge of any other move-ins which happened last year. So it is putting us into a tight place. But it is something to try to help with the budget. And then the .4 is a phys ed position that the person is retiring, and then we are restructuring within the district to cover that.
Are there paras in the rooms with the people that have those high numbers?
Not currently. Most of our instructional assistants are one-on-ones or in the preschool and kindergarten, with a couple of slight variations, but primarily we do not have classroom assistants.
Oh my goodness.
Can I just I originally had proposed a reduction of 1 teacher, and it moved to 2 in the process, so.
The space in Northfield that's been used for the Hive, what is that being used for this coming year?
Still for the Hive.
Is it?
Yep.
What's the Hive?
It's a behavioral program.
Thank you.
It's a district-wide program, and we also have an essential skills or life skills program that's a district program in our building as well.
The cost to run that program in the Hive versus what we're saving the district, do you have?
I don't have those numbers. I did ask that question and was told that it would be more costly to have out-of-district placements than supporting the students in-house.
I think it would be, but
Yes.
it'd be nice to see the figures.
Yeah, I don't know.
Chris.
Chris.
We could ask our special education director for that information.
Thank you.
Oh.
It's over there.
I didn't see her back there.
So when we have a district-wide program like that's not part of your regular budget, right? That's under the SPED budget.
Correct.
Yeah.
They're sped or shared depending on the role.
So typically, Sharon, it costs about, I would say, an average out-of-district placement costs about $50,000. That's an average. Some are a lot more than that. Some are short, maybe slightly less than that, but it's about 50. Typically also, that involves paying for an aide at that program. That comes out of our budget. It also involves transportation. And the transportation, as we know from previous discussions about my transportation line, is huge. And also, given the nature of the students that we have to send out, oftentimes on the van itself, I have to provide a monitor, and I have to pay for that monitor, because the van driver needs to be able to drive without worrying about the behavior of the students behind them. So having a teacher in district with a couple of aides working with some high needs kids is still less expensive than sending them out. Not to mention philosophically, it's better, we have better outcomes if we keep our students in their community with their peers, and our aim is always to integrate them into the schools as much as possible.
I understand that. What I really would like to see is how many students are there, how much would it cost us to send them out, and how much is it costing us to keep them in district?
If you want specific numbers,
It would be
I can
good to see at
provide
some
them.
point.
I can
Yeah.
send them to you, yes. Again, I
Or
don't
to
want
the
to, I have to
committee,
be
maybe.
careful about what I say publicly.
Well, yeah, I don't want
But in
names
general,
or anything.
yes, in general, what I said is true, is that, if you had a couple of students with one teacher, it's still cheaper than sending those 2 students out. That would be $100,000 right there, just conservatively.
Yeah, I totally understand that.
So Chris, the 50,000 was not all in. It was 50,000 would be the fee to the receiving
Yeah.
institution plus transportation.
Right.
Plus
Yeah.
Right.
an aid.
So
Right.
that's what I'm looking for,
Yes,
really.
it's
the
all,
cost of
you know,
one.
that all adds up, and ends up being more expensive. That said, sometimes I can't do it. Sometimes it's not appropriate for, you know, when I do send out, but I try to be very conservative about that.
And I totally respect the confidentiality. I was just looking for a number.
Right.
It's
Okay.
gonna cost probably $70,000-$80,000 per student when it's all said and done with transportation and so on and
Yes.
so forth.
Yes.
And yet, if we
Yeah.
keep a student in-house, we've got a savings of maybe 30, 40,000 per student. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for, that's all.
Yes, yeah, okay. I will send everybody an email on the school committee, probably
And
tomorrow.
I would just add that the district has a responsibility to service students to the best of our ability within their home schools, despite their needs, as long as we can do that.
We're going to be talking with Gilmani about sharing and about sharing possible resources. And I'm just wondering if you guys could think about as we go forward, we have these programs. Do we have any capacity for inviting, say, Gilmontague to send students to us, to these programs, where they would pay?
At some point, we may. We're
Mhm.
still, it's only been a couple of years. And
Okay.
it takes a while to, you know, build up that kind
Yeah.
of capacity.
Yeah.
So it has been
Yeah.
on my mind to do that.
So, and I look forward to those conversations, because they may have programs that we could also share with, rather than sending out at such high cost.
And I will say that Gil Montague contacted us about transportation costs.
Excellent.
And sharing that,
Mhm.
and I did share data with them in
Great.
terms of who I send out, how much it costs, where
Great.
they're going, so we can combine some routes
Right.
with students from other districts. There may be a savings there
One
as well.
one of the things I heard in passing from Gil Montague was, tell them to talk to Frontier, they have some combining of routes they could do. So I don't know if you've done that, but yeah.
And just that, the grant that was written by the superintendent and Gil Montague to look at a lot of, transportation is one of the things that's under that grant to be looked at, and that's where all that data went, because we sent regular transportation information as well as special education transportation, and the consultant that has been hired is looking at all of that for 3 or 4 school districts to see how much we could all consolidate and save money, because transportation is a huge expense.
There's a note here that says offset against a special need instructional assistant. Can you tell me what it was offset against?
So for that line, there's a grant that I think we just learned about. So $4,000 will be applied to a preschool instructional assistant salary, which means we were able to reduce that by $4,000.
Oh, that's the next one down, is it, you're talking about?
That offset will happen in Bernardston and in Northfield. Those are the 2 schools that qualify for that universal pre-K grant, and that was written, Renee and I wrote that, and then it was, had to be tweaked in the last 24 hours and resent, and we had to change some documentation for signatures from Ruth to myself, and so that all got in on time, and that's about $17,500 that the district did not receive last year. So this morning, we put this in Bernardston and Northfield, so you would have that information.
Okay.
And can I elaborate? Sorry, offset, comma. So offset was actually different. If you look at the special needs instructional assistant and the classroom instructional assistants, I think, as Bob mentioned, those do fluctuate in terms of the role that people play. So that means the dollars change from year to year, and this is accurately reflecting the roles that people will be in. And so those 2 line items pretty much balance out when you add them together to what they were the previous year, roughly. Thank you.
And how's this compared to actual? It's less than previously budgeted, but you've done the actual.
We've got the salaries added up.
The
yes,
salaries are in those lines.
as of today.
Other questions about Northfield?
I just want to go back to the staffing question, because I saw the reaction to the class size piece, and I think that it is helpful to, I know Pat said that maybe there is a policy. I have looked due to some class size issues that I was facing at the end of August. It would be helpful to have advice from the school committee about what your desired class size is that we could adhere to. But again, it does often depend on the dynamics of a particular class as well, so that can be challenging. Our class sizes for Northfield next year are looking higher than what has been typical for Northfield. I would say typical for surrounding areas, but we will have many class sizes that are 20 at the low end and 23, 24, generally speaking, plus a couple that are, maybe 26 or 7. And there are still pieces and parts that we do not know in terms of whether some students will be staying or leaving or new people moving in. So those are tricky things to plan for when we're sitting on the edge of 1 or 2 classes.
Are there state mandates for class sizes? No, okay. I'm just asking because that's something I don't know.
Megan, what's the smallest class that you've scheduled?
So the smallest class, anticipated class size for next year would be 13 in the 3rd grade, 2 13s, or maybe 13 in one and 14 in the other, based on some incoming students. And that is a grade I'm not comfortable putting together into one class for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I just got to say, going forward, we expect our teachers to do a lot these days, right? There's a lot of accountability, and I just don't know how one teacher can be expected to meet the individualized learning needs of 27 students without a skilled instructional assistant to support them. I mean, you have to do small groupings. You have to individualize your curriculum. I just think if we're going to do that right now, we have to know that in the future we cannot keep doing that. That's just not instructionally sound in my mind. So may have to grit my teeth and just do it right now, but I hate that idea.
And Sue, I think when we get to a bottom figure of what we actually need, if that may be something we could add after July 1st, if the towns do vote to, I know that's another item for the agenda, but I think we have to cut to get to where we need to be, and those are things that maybe we could add back in since we did cut teachers. If we need to add an aide that's half the cost of a teacher, those could be things that we could add to satisfy the community within the amount that we ask for.
Yeah, that would be a priority.
I feel like you, Sue, if you've ever been in a classroom with a lot of first or second graders that are very movable, it's pretty hard to get them settled down, especially after recess or right before lunch, whatever.
Ready to move on to Warwick?
The nurse thing, can someone explain that?
Are we on Northfield still?
Yeah.
Okay.
Such a smaller number.
Yep. We have a nursery.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
you.
All right, that's good enough. Thank you.
So, budget 4, Warwick. Elizabeth, would you like to join us? It wasn't really a question, was it? Well, thank you for what you're personally doing here to try and make this work. So I guess I'll start with any questions from the committee.
Well, I'll show you that I won't reduce my time at work.
That's important to us, I think.
But it looks like I will not reduce my time at Warwick.
But it looks like your hours are being reduced.
She's not reducing her hours are staying the same. Her pay is being reduced.
Again, that's not okay. Right, we have got to get that money back in there somehow. That is not okay.
As David referred to, the administrative assistant line is zeroed out, so.
It is. I'd like to speak to that a little bit. I have a concept of our office being a learning space as well as an office. There are times of the day when the office is very busy and it wouldn't be an appropriate learning space. But there are other times of the day when our office is relatively quiet. And by putting myself in where I can work at the what would often be the administrative assistant's chair, and allowing my title teacher or one of my small group teachers to work in my office, I think if we're creative, the one thing about Warwick is everyone wears many hats, and we can work together often without even talking to each other. We understand.
Yeah.
I think it will work.
The special needs instructional assistant reduction, can you?
Again, someone was recategorized. If you put them together, we are losing 0.5 of an instructional assistant, but and so the budget is a little bit less for instructional assistants, but yeah.
And can I just clarify, have we just removed all field trip transportation across the district?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. We'll move on to Pioneer.
I would like to say, just to be clear, all of the principals work well above contracted hours, just so you're clear.
All right, we're on the Pioneer budget.
Oh, sure.
I'm not sure.
So, committee will start with questions.
Teacher salaries, could you explain the 3 reductions?
So, from my recollection, I haven't been in all of the conversations about the budget, but the last I remember, the 3 FTEs, one was a retirement that wouldn't, because of class sizes, wouldn't be needed. One is due to the numbers, the anticipated class sizes in 7 and 8 in the middle school. And one is as a result of restructuring the world language department. That was in conversation with those folks about what would be best and what the needs are. So that's my best recollection of that.
What was the second one?
The numbers, the anticipated class sizes in 7 and 8.
What subject area is that?
I believe it's in science. Yeah, I believe it's in science.
Question for Pat.
And then afterwards it says 1 transfer to sped. Is that one of those 3, or is that a different position?
I believe that's a different position. That's a different position.
You made the statement about restructuring languages. Are we still going to be able to offer 2 different languages?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that's very, very important.
Yep, that is the plan.
Pat, where's our principal?
She was at a conference today in Boston,
Thank you.
so she was not able to attend this evening.
Thank you.
Moreover, this was conceived as a working budget subcommittee meeting, and after Thursday's meeting, speaking with Gail, she cautioned me that this is a very busy time for administrators and principals, and so I sent an email as budget subcommittee chair saying your presence would be welcome, but you're not expected to be here. A lot of the purpose of this meeting is to gather our questions, because this is not going to be a one-off meeting to settle our troubles.
Okay. So is the increase in special needs instructional assistant, can you explain that? Is that the addition of the person from above there, or?
Say that again, in the addition of?
Of the person where it says
No.
transferred to, no, so
No,
this
that's
is
the
di-
actual
this-
cost.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
that's actual cost.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm wondering-
So putting back in there the
Yes,
needs of our
yes.
students. Yep.
John, did you have a question?
Next page. Fuel line item, I was just curious why it went up 70% when the other schools average like 10 or 20%.
Where's your Go ahead. No, go ahead. We have overspent our budget this year on fuel. We went into this year pretty much with empty tanks, and it was calculated. We did not calculate going into this year with empty tanks. We are also going into next year with relatively empty tanks at Pioneer. Therefore, not only that, but we have a contract. Our contract was just signed just recently, where normally our contract is signed in December, January, and it was just signed by our facilities director, pulled it all together. So we did not get as good a rate as what we have had in the past.
And it was not due to the facilities director not doing it. He stepped up and did it because it wasn't done.
He and I worked together.
And Brenda
from
also did a lot of,
Yes.
Brenda also did a lot, thank you, because I, in addition to principals putting in more hours, the unending and extra time and meetings that both Suzanne and Brenda have come to, and Brenda's knowledge base is phenomenal. And because some of the budget didn't reflect what Brenda all along had been saying, and that's why it says actual cost amongst a lot of these, beside all of these, many of these, not all of them. But Brenda has done the business manager's job.
Thank you, Brenda.
Yes, thank you.
I'd also like to add one other thing, with Tanya, who is like volunteering a lot of time to help us.
Oh, I am not mentioning her.
No,
I'm talking about the
yep.
last year and a half to 2 years.
Definitely. Brenda has definitely stepped up to the plate. I have said since I started here that Brenda, in addition to Suzanne and then myself with my past experience, being able to step in and fill these shoes that haven't been, to provide this information to the community and the subcommittee. Without the information from Brenda and Suzanne, I don't think we'd be sitting here at this table with the figures that we have in front of us right now, and knowing that they're accurate.
Yeah.
All right, turning to the Pioneer budget.
This is
While we're on it. Right?
We're done with Pioneer?
Are we done with that?
Yeah. I'm done.
Okay. So
Thank
moving
you.
to- Moving to share.
I just want to speak to the two lines that were brought down from FY18, the 80,000 and the 8,000 for district tech annual renewal and district tech hardware are in line with actual expenditures from FY18, and we don't expect them to be significantly more. There's a little bit added into those, but not a significant amount.
So I have a question.
Sure.
The last time I tried to tease this out with Ruth, it looked like we did not have a technology director at this time, that we had only a part-time data person. Is that true?
You, the school committee authorized to advertise for a technology director, and those interviews happened by the part-time technology director and the technology data person and the technology assistant. And we will soon, hopefully, have a full-time technology director, which this district desperately needs.
So I was accurate that we did go for quite a while without a tech director.
She helped us out, and it was very part-time. She did get paid, but she would come in at night.
Okay.
So you're telling us that now we, hopefully by the end of this month, we'll get a technology person on board?
But I'm hoping that the person will be able to start July 1st or as soon as I can
Wonderful.
negotiate that, and I'm assuming I will go ahead and do that instead of waiting, yes.
Yeah, thank you so
I
much.
can't tell, you can ask that.
Is that the same person we've had? The tech?
No.
Is what? The same?
No,
The
it's
tech.
new hiring.
It's a
No,
new
this is a new
hire.
hire.
Okay, so
Sorry,
she
I
can
didn't
apply and
understand
get
what you were
hired.
saying.
Thank you.
And they'll be here during school hours.
And the person will work during school hours, yes.
The line item district tech annual / renewal. What is that?
Those are all of our software requirements, our accounting software, all those things that have to be renewed on an annual basis. So the 67,000 that was proposed was 13,000 under our actual expenditures from FY18. So we can't underfund that because those are
No, we cannot. They're
mandated
renewable.
renewals.
It's all of the schools'
The Microsoft, all of that
programs
stuff.
and student use programs as well that we need to have. And this is an actual cost.
There's also a nursing program.
Right.
There's several different programs that we have to pay for the licenses, and we have to pay to use them every year.
Yep. Sharon?
The tech hardware or the Chromebook replacements, 35,000. I thought I remembered us voting on that and saying we wouldn't fund it.
I'm just looking for it.
It's
The only
the-
question would be which year. I do remember that, or whether it had to do with this.
Well,
I
there
thought it was
is,
this
and
budget.
I realized that a few years ago, you authorized, the towns actually authorized and voted for 400,000 over a course of time. We have done nothing in replacing or upgrading equipment this year, so it's time.
And unfortunately, what happens with that one-time tech grant is you replace everything at once. So that means everything starts failing at the same time. So something coming in as the business manager, if that is where I end up after negotiations, is working on a capital plan that will fund technology on a stepped basis in the different schools. That's how it was done where I previously worked. I think a capital plan is something that this district definitely needs so that the towns have more level assessments with those capital expenditures also going forward.
I agree with that, and I agree with updating our equipment and things of that nature, but in this particular financial climate, where we're having to reduce our staff, our teaching warriors, I find it very hard to support $35,000 for new Chromebooks.
We will mark this for future consideration and possible cuts.
Was there another school that we were doing Chromebooks at also? It was Northfield,
That's
right?
the elementary hardware, a few down.
Yep.
Talking about having equity for student access
Yeah.
as far as equipment, technology also.
So I believe next year is the final $100,000 payment on technology, but that is simply addressing the borrowing, the
So that's,
expenditure's been made.
yes, that's technology
Correct.
that was replaced 4 years ago.
3.
Or, well, yeah, it will be 4 at the end of the year.
And I would just like to point out that more and more of the state assessments are online and require more devices in order to carry it out.
Yes. And they have to be able to support the software that the state standardized testings come through. And I don't know, with a technology director, to assess those types of things, I think will be important.
Other questions about the shared budget? Sue?
I've been trying to understand the shared teacher line for a while now. Can you talk about that line and what's different?
Okay, that is what I spoke about earlier, those are the specials at the elementary school. So in order to keep specials at the elementary school, we restructured, and every elementary school will have those specials for 30 minutes a day. So it's consistent and they are not cut.
So we have not cut chorus, we have not cut band.
Chorus is not part of the specials. Instrumental music, we are still working on a way to make that happen. Maybe not to the extent that it happens now. Now it includes 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So we're talking about perhaps 5th and 6th. So there still is a feeder program. We haven't exactly worked that out, but that's what it looks like we're going to be able to do.
So the amount that's in here now includes the staff that we currently have to cover those. I think the scheduling is still
Not the
something.
staff that not the faculty
No,
that
we currently have, but
have.
what's going to be assigned for next
Yes.
year. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Elizabeth?
what if we cut?
And we've also taken a more district-wide concept.
Yep.
I mean, of all 5 schools working together with our specialists.
Yep.
So that, there is the feeder program, so that, so that it can happen across the district. It's not anything we want to cut back on. Nothing. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
But we worked as hard as we could to maintain it in every school, in every area.
I just want to understand it. So if I could see a line item description of what we had last year and what we're doing next year in the shared teacher line, that would help me.
I think the difference, and jump in please, but the difference is that there is a retirement that instead of having, some schools had 40 minutes, some schools had 45, there will be 30 minutes of each, which means less people and more people are shared, but we didn't cut the specials, which is what people clearly said. And we also agree that that shouldn't happen.
So, again, I understand we've cut time. Have we cut programs or people?
Some part-time people, yes.
So hours have been, full-time equivalent times have been cut, but the programs will still be maintained.
Okay. I'm sorry to beat this, but.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so we still have an instrumental music program in our elementary school. It just starts in a later grade.
We're still in the process of restructuring that, but yes, our plan is to offer instrumental music.
In elementary.
In elementary and at Pioneer.
Yes, yes, yes.
And we believe we can do it.
Yes.
We do believe we can do it. The actual nitty-gritty of Tuesday at
Right,
know,
yeah, the
2 o'clock
scheduling and
has to
it-
be
yeah,
worked
yeah.
out. But we think we have the capacity to do it, and we've had a wonderful Cadillac program before, and it won't look the same. We have to take a more district approach, but we are committed to making sure that there's a quality experience.
And we all did this together.
Okay.
I know it's been said a million times, and I'll make it 1,000,001. I cannot thank our administrators, our financial gurus enough for all they have done. It's amazing that finally, after 2 years, we're getting figures, we're getting people that can tell us what's happening, what they want to have happen, what can happen. We haven't seen that for just too long, and I am just so thankful. Okay, is there anything else on the shared staff?
The transportation?
Transportation?
Transportation, we cut 1 bus last year. It happened to be Bernardston routes. We are cutting another bus this year. It will happen to be Northfield routes. We've already alerted or made the Vernon families aware that the bus company, and I learned that it was called the Vernon Loop. There'll be a pickup and a drop-off at a safe place at the Vernon line, but we're not going to do the loop. Probably more for time than anything else. That is what used to happen.
And are we cutting, is it the late bus also?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And there will be no Monday and Thursday late bus.
How does that impact the kids that need extra help at school, or, I'm
That
not
was-
worried about the athletics, I'm worried about the academics.
Yeah, that's a good question. Feel free, Jen, but I think that will still be available.
Okay.
But there won't be busing. And again, that's in the big picture of debating and
That late
worrying
bus
over
cost
these
us
things.
roughly $12,000 from what I
It's a huge
understand.
cost for a minimal amount of students, but they will still be offered
Right.
that
The teachers
help.
will still, offer their time as they always have. But what we found was that there were fewer than 10 kids per bus. Some of the buses not running because there's no kids using them and things like that. So it seemed like, in the grand scheme of things, something that wasn't very well used.
Right.
And we all agree that we don't want to cut anything, but the reality is we have to. So we had these weighted discussions, and when you look at $12,000 for that small amount and number of students, it needs to be cut.
And partly, if I can add to that, like Megan had said earlier, that this year there was a restructuring of the late buses to begin with, and some of those numbers that had decreased were a result of that cutting this year and reconfiguring. So that's the impact.
The buses, who makes out the schedule for, and the routes for picking the kids up and dropping them off?
The majority of that work is done by the bus company. I did ask them early on in my job, in my years here, to educate me on how that's done. I do not want that responsibility, and again, that's something that's included in the cost of what, I guess you could count it as included in the cost of what we pay for transportation. They have electronic mapping systems. Every year they seem to increase their technology. She explained it to me. I've ridden on the routes with them because one of my hats is transportation. I don't know all the routes in all 4 towns. I don't claim to know all the roads in the town that I've lived in for 34 years. But that's part of the technology and part of what being a bus company and managing buses and routes allows them to be able to do easily, much easier than doing it on a piece of paper or actually driving around.
What is the cost of a bus? What, or how much do we save? I'm remembering 23, I'm remembering 43.
When we cut a bus, I asked the owner of the bus company, and she said that you can say that a cut of a bus is $65,000.
Now, can we add that question to our list of questions, to contact the bus company and ask if they can give us a printout from this elaborate electronic system that they have of the routes and...
Well, they, to answer that somewhat, I mean, it's not a visual map, but every year before school starts, it's usually 2 weeks before school starts, they post very intricate routes and times of pickups and approximate times of drop-offs for every bus and every route in every town, for all the districts that they serve.
The reason I'm asking this is because I've heard several taxpayers say, gee, is anybody checking on the buses to see if they're using their time and picking up the appropriate amount of kids, because they've seen large buses with 2, 3 kids on them, and...
That's true. And it varies depending on who goes to school on what days. The elementary and Pioneer students both ride the Leiden buses and the Warwick buses together, so those buses are going to be full, or more full than
they used to.
The other towns. No, they've done that since I've been here, so that's nothing that changed.
Because of the class changes, but yeah.
I think that part of what will happen is that there won't be as many stops because of cutting a bus, and that's what we saw in Bernardston last year. It's not tremendous, but that's time too. And fuel consumption is also part of the cost of the bus. I mean, they have this whole formula, and Brenda has spoken to them probably more about that than I have.
And I think
Megan,
in addition, so go ahead.
Megan.
I just want to say or add that in the fall, I believe it was, we were asked to collect data on our buses.
Yes, thank you.
And so every
We did that.
morning, we would do attendance and count exactly how many people rode in and how many people left each
So
day per week.
do we have the data that Sharon's asking for, or do we need to trouble the bus company?
Well, I don't know how the routes would be restructured, but I
Right.
know that Northfield has a bus in particular that is a very, very empty bus,
Yeah.
and it's full size.
And they won't have those routes done now, because it's not the time of year that they'll have them done. Just to give you explanations of things I've been told over the years when I've either driven routes or asked questions, and I ask a lot of questions, is that depending upon where people live and where the bus is driving depends on what bus they can send there, i.e. a small bus or a large bus, because if it's a dead-end road on a dirt road and it's narrow, you can't send a large bus up there because there's nowhere to turn around safely. I mean, we have a few bus drivers sitting in the audience too, so they might be able to give more information.
And I think in addition to, it's kind of like the health and life insurance thing. You have to make that bus available to every student that comes to your school, whether or not they ride the bus. I will tell you personally, my students no longer ride their bus because of the bus driver that was supposed to be let go and wasn't, so they switched routes, and I won't let my children ride the bus. So she goes to school every day with like 4 kids on a full-size bus. But the district is obligated to provide transportation for every student in the district.
That is correct.
Well, I just think that we could still do that and be a little more mindful of our spending.
We are trying to be very mindful of our spending. That's why another bus is being cut.
Company.
Yes.
Becky?
I just wondered if you know the cost of the late bus. I mean, if we did one instead of 2 afternoons, I'm just worried about the kids that...
The late bus cost was $12,000, and that's actually why we are over budget in transportation this year to almost exactly that dollar amount.
So that's $12,000 for 2 buses for the entire school year?
I think that's one bus.
It's
from what I
one bus
understood,
on, isn't it one?
No, it's
Two
2 buses.
2 buses on Mondays and Thursdays. That's a lot of money.
So
I mean, that's
wrote-
$12,000, if that's $12,000, you'd have to cut somewhere else if that went back in.
I wrote down a question about the Vernon tuition and buses. Do we have enough Vernon kids coming here to pay for the bus we haul them on?
I used to ask the previous superintendent that question, and I don't know the actual figures and numbers, but that bus has to go right up there anyway.
So when you speak
It
to
wouldn't be cutting a bus.
Yeah, when you speak to Vernon,
It's right- yeah.
we have an
'Cause we
estimated.
go to the state line anyway.
Yeah, we have an
Right.
estimated 9 children coming in next year at $14,000 or $15,000 tuition per student. That's our estimate right now from Vernon. But like she said, we drive by that anyways.
Years ago, or when I first started, they used to stop at the library. That was the stop. So we'll decide, but like I said, those families have already been notified, so it's not a surprise.
So we have Pioneer students that are at the end of that line that need to be picked up, and that's why we continue to do that loop.
Is there a spot for?
Say in the microphone and we'll.
I was asking, I see the halftime curriculum coordinator under the Pioneer budget. Is there anyone part-time for the elementary?
No. It was reduced.
So, I would like us to adjourn to next.
But not all of it. I have students who are intra-district transportation. I have some parents that I reimburse for driving their students. It's somewhat cheaper than Vanpool, but I still have to, nevertheless, I have to offer it to them. I also need to cover field trips, Special Olympics field trips that regular ed students are going on, maybe to Boston. My students are entitled to go, and that means they can't ride the regular bus. Oftentimes it also means that they require a nurse to go with them. So all of these costs are fairly high, and I have looked at other agencies, but even Kosmeskis was twice as much for one trip that I looked at. So I am looking, as I said, looking to the Gil Montague group to see if we can cut costs that way. I recently heard about Brattleboro uses something with Kosmeskis. They have some kind of special deal, so I will be checking that out. I'm open to checking out anything that's available, but everything I've looked at doesn't operate in this area. So.
Chris, I see that you and Kate and the psychologist are all having the same rate of pay as you had the previous year. So once again, the administrators are coming at us again. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
John?
Yeah, Chris, on the special needs transportation, I think when we went over that this winter, I think the superintendent said one of the reasons for that was to try to get reimbursement for transportation.
Yes.
And if that's the case, if we get, say, 60% reimbursement of $350,000, that would be $210,000 of extra revenue that we would receive. So
that would be great. I don't know. I don't
that
know
was
if
the
that's
reason
actually
for
going to
putting it
happen.
there.
That's
I
what
don't
she
think-
said. I don't know.
No. So the transportation reimbursement is just for Pioneer and Elementary. The reason this is being put into the general fund budget is because it would be typically reimbursed or covered under our 240 SPED grant, but those funds are continuing to decrease just like every other grant out there in the Massachusetts market. So we as a school are required to transport them, so we need to make sure that we're accurately funded. And I think Brenda can speak to the fact that this was overspent this year, and that's part of the reason our transportation budget's overspent, because our grant could not consume the expense needed for these special ed students to be transported. So it's now going in the general fund.
Chris, you will have more bills that will be coming in, and at this point, I can't charge them to the grant anymore So I am charging them to the general transportation line now. So the general transportation line will continue to be overspent this year.
And as I mentioned last Thursday evening, grant funding just as school budgets, but grant funding cannot be overspent. They have to balance, or either you don't spend the money or it has to balance. You cannot overspend grants.
If you do, you're not spending grant money anymore, are you?
Well, in
That's the
addition to not being allowed to overspend the grant money that you don't have, but when the state actually certifies your E&D or deficit, they double count that, because not only have you deficit spent, but they're considering that the district has to make up for that and replace those funds. So it's a double whammy from the state's perspective, from a reporting
ours.
standpoint. I know, but I'm just saying, so when we get reports out, they double slam us for those.
We have overspent our SPED grant this year with transportation. It is in a deficit. So before we close the year out, we are going to have to journal adjust that money that's in that grant and put what the deficit is from that grant into the budget.
Will that grow the guesstimate of $400,000 to $450,000 loss, or had that been considered already?
That could grow it.
Yeah. It will grow our deficit. Brenda and I will be spending an extra day outside of the time that I spend here Wednesdays as treasurer to print out the trial balance and go through it with a fine-tooth comb, grants and general fund alike, to make sure that all the expenses are where they should be. So if there's any grant expenditures that need to be moved to general fund, that will happen before the end of this year, so that our deficit will be all encompassing and we won't be looking to move anything after the fact.
I'm just wondering, could you talk about the relationship between special ed transportation and circuit breaker funds? Does circuit breaker funds, can they be offsetting special ed transportation, or no?
Do you want to address that?
Well, circuit breaker covers the following year, basically.
Right.
So, and I believe, usually we put like tuition towards that, and it varies from year to year as well. There's a minimum amount that circuit breaker is based on the tuition that you pay to out-of-district placements. And they have a basic amount that they expect you to pay. Like,
right.
So.
Let me give you the context of my question. When the HART committee convened a group of civic leaders with Paul Mark in March, one of the things we talked to him about was the really high cost of special ed transportation and the fact that it's not reimbursed by the state. Mm-hmm. And he was surprised. He was unaware of that how high the cost was. And so what he told us as a group was that he went back to Boston and spoke with colleagues who from their districts were also talking about that cost, and that it wasn't supported by a transportation reimbursement. And that led them to recommend in their House budget a significant increase in circuit breaker funds. So that's why I'm trying to understand the relationship between circuit breaker and special ed transportation costs, because I think we need to start advocating with the state. All right, transportation reimbursements should include transportation reimbursements for all of our students, and that those costs need to be included in the future.
If that does start to get reimbursed, that would be nice, but we have to keep in mind that we are already in a deficit with our circuit breaker.
Yeah, I wouldn't budget for it. I wouldn't
Yeah, no,
expect it. I'm
but-
just saying he stood on the stage as he's taking notes and said, I did not understand that level of cost and that is not covered. So we should talk more about that.
We've consistently been receiving less and less money every year in our circuit breaker account. So it's going that too, just as our SPED grant, our circuit breaker is dwindling every year as well as what we're receiving.
But the costs continue to go up.
So Chris, when you report or file for circuit breaker, is it a, does it concern all of our special needs activities, or is it taking it case by case, and this was an extraordinarily high expense, and that's how we qualify?
Well, there's two different kinds of circuit breakers. One is extraordinary circuit breaker that sometimes you can qualify for. That was the, I think Ruth reported that was $67,000 we were getting. The actual circuit breaker for this year doesn't go in until July 1st. And they do include, you look at Medicaid, possible reimbursement for that, depending on what services the students are getting, OT, PT, so all of that is included, and a small percentage of that is reimbursed. Last year we got $84,000, I think, for circuit breaker. We might be looking at some more for this year, but it hasn't come out as yet. It hasn't even been sent in yet. It's prepared, but it hasn't been sent in.
So I remember the auditors telling us at the end of, this was last month, that at the end of fiscal 17, we were $140,000 overspent in circuit breaker. Do we have a feel for what that number is or will be for this year?
That deficit, as I spoke to in the meeting when the state representatives came, we've received $63,000 in regular circuit breaker in FY18, so that will bring our deficit down to 77, because I think it was an even 140. The 67 that Chris is speaking to actually has to be spent in this year, the extraordinary circuit breaker, so that will be used to offset the special ed transportation first, and then the general fund. And Brenda and I have had this conversation. So that $67,000 has to be spent in the current fiscal year. So that will be used to cover part of the special ed transportation, and then any remaining deficit in the special ed grant will get moved to the general fund for transportation.
So the first thing that I'll be doing is I'll be taking a look at that grant that we've overspent, and that $67,000 is going to, first and foremost, is going to have to cover that deficit in the grant. And then we'll move on to, like Tanya said, to the general fund.
Committee, other questions, comments? Thank you, Chris. Folks, I will write up our questions and distribute them. If one occurs to you, send it along.
Thank you, Dave.
Is the committee satisfied that we talked about our member concerns? Okay, so we're now on discussion of more assessment to the towns or a supplemental appropriation. I think at our Thursday meeting, we voted to ask the towns. Did we in fact? No. Okay.
We moved that till this discussion. And I'm not a member of the school committee, but I would actually ask one of you to make a motion to move this to next Tuesday, because until you guys negotiate for a business manager, superintendent salaries, as well as look at some of these other cuts where we don't have a solid number to ask for. So if we ask for 300 and then realize we need 350, or we ask for 300 and we only really need 250, I think we need to have a solid deficit figure before we vote to ask for that amount.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'll make a motion to move this agenda item to next Tuesday or further on if we don't have the appropriate information.
I'll second that, but I want to ask the town officials, we've got a few of them here, do you have a deadline of when you need this figure?
The towns
No?
don't go for
Okay.
tax rate setting till October or November of next year.
So we have a motion and a second to hold this over to next Tuesday or a subsequent meeting if it's not appropriate. We'll have it on the next Tuesday agenda.
Is our negotiating committee scheduled to meet so that we can?
We are not, but we're going to need to.
Thinking that the closest we can do it is Monday.
C&P has to meet to discuss job descriptions too.
Some way both of us meet.
could meet Tuesday before the meeting.
I'd be willing to work,
I could do that.
to meet Wednesday. I have a selectmen's meeting Monday night,
Next
which,
Tuesday? What time?
If we're going to need to discuss this, we can do the negotiation before we discuss this.
yeah, well, I think it would be appropriate to have a bit of a discussion about this very concept. I've heard some contradictory things from DOR with respect to, on the one hand, MJ said, we aren't going to set your tax rate until your regional school district has a balanced budget. On the other hand, my DOR rep who reports to MJ vetted my work with Town of Warwick and calculation of excess capacity, and I felt we were in pretty good shape with $175,000, which is 75,000 is $1 on the tax rate. So without an override, we could add more than $2 in Warwick. The point was it's not sustainable, and you'd be crazy. This is not a one-time expense. This gets baked in, and Warwick risks hitting the levy. I'm sorry, the tax limit, the tax rate. It can't go higher than 25, except for capital debt excluded items or capital exclusions. You can't tax higher.
So if we don't go to the towns, then the next step is where else do we cut? And those decisions will need to be made before July 1st, because it will be after July 1st with special town meetings before the towns can vote that. If the towns vote the additional fund, then we could bring back the cuts after July 1st that have been, because at this point, I think the administration has done all they
We
can.
cannot cross our fingers and hope for
No.
additional revenue.
No.
Any revenue that comes in, we'll be able to restore if we actually realize some of the state savings that have been discussed.
Do we have a vote?
We still have to book two meetings for next Tuesday before the budget meeting.
We need to vote on that motion.
Yeah, the motion.
There being no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? It's unanimous.
Do we need to figure out dates for CMP negotiations and budget?
Yes, that makes sense.
So, David, you said you couldn't do it Monday night?
Well, I would have to ask permission. I've done it before. I'll give up my Wednesday night. I'll make Tuesday available, and Monday's a possibility if that's all that works.
Okay. CMP and negotiations, when did you say you?
I could meet before the budget meeting, like at 5, to do the job descriptions
Okay,
on Tuesday.
but we need to negotiate before we figure out the budget.
What if,
So we can't negotiate until after we get the job.
what if you guys did Tuesday negotiations and Wednesday
We're just trying
meeting?
to figure out what we're doing.
What if you guys did your hiring committee stuff or whatever you guys have going on Tuesday, and then do the budget meeting next Wednesday?
Would that work?
Graduations are coming up, just be aware.
What is going on next week for the graduations? I don't have my calendar in front of me. Next week, is there elementary graduations?
Yes.
What days?
This Friday is Northfield.
Wednesday is Warwick.
And Pearl Road's on
And
Wednesday.
Pearl Road's
on
and
Wednesday.
on Monday.
So Monday,
Tuesday.
nothing on Tuesday. All right. So that leaves us to budget on Tuesday, right? And CMP before that.
Negotiations
And so when are we going to do negotiations?
after CMP, before budget.
How in the heck are you going to do that?
If the budget meeting is at 7,
Yes.
we've done the bulk of the discussions for the numbers tonight. Next week, I think the conversations need to be had about recommendations between the subcommittee, where we're going to be looking for cuts, and then obviously the recommendation for the towns. So there's a two-part. What are we going to ask the towns for? And that same amount that we need to look at for cuts in the event that the towns don't vote to give us extra money.
Sue, how early could you do CMP?
5.
All right, is it,
Who's here from negotiations?
are we thinking that we could meet with CMP for an hour and negotiations for the next hour and then
Yeah.
do
We'll just do the
budget?
job description.
And you guys could split the
All right.
6:30 with John and myself.
Now, with these negotiations, they would be private, I mean, these would be executive session, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm
They
not on
should
the
be.
negotiations.
Yeah, I am. Excuse me? Executive session?
No, I think three of us, three or four of us could be
Uh-huh. Right, okay. So we'll plan on that, and then we can always cancel it. Okay?
So 5 o'clock CMP Tuesday?
Yep. 5 o'clock CMP on Tuesday. 6 o'clock negotiations executive session Tuesday. 7 o'clock budget Tuesday open session. And it's possible that some of us on negotiations might be able to get together ahead of time and figure out what we're going to do on negotiations before we invite both Tanya and John in to join us. Are those dates okay for the two of you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
This Thursday.
Scheduled until it changes next time.
Do we have a meeting this Thursday?
Do we have any meetings scheduled for the remainder of this week?
And I will just note that if you guys decide to meet earlier in the day Tuesday, I think my school day next week will actually be probably Tuesday. So
That might be easier.
I'm just
Yeah.
putting that out there
Okay.
because I do have a weekend travel planned next weekend, so I may adjust that day next week.
So I'm a little confused as to what we're being tasked with here. There's no way that we're gonna find 300,000 to cut. We've cut and cut again. We have to balance it.
We do. What I would suggest for homework is to take these documents and again, review them. We've already been making cuts that we're not comfortable with, but we have to balance this budget, and our options are pretty well lined out here. God bless you if you think of another good one.
Keep in mind that once we speak with the state, that may decrease to 185,000 from 285, because if that 831,000 is a legit number for school choice receiving, that will decrease the 100,000 in the general. So I will contact Mary Jane or one of our representatives tomorrow while I'm here and find out what is involved in that 831 calculation, to be sure that that is a number that we can depend on, seeing as how the transportation numbers have not consistently been dependable. So I just want to make sure that the state can back that.
You can let us all know.
Yep, so I will send an email to the school committee to let you guys know about that 100,000 once, because that certainly helps. As well as the 766, because that was an additional 22 that we needed. So the net of those is 78,000.
Can I just point out that not only are we under a time crunch for all of this, and I'm only gonna say this because Suzanne's not here to speak for herself, I believe that it's usually within the next 3 to 4 days that she has to start loading all of payroll into the system for next year to make the first payroll for fiscal year 19. So she is, I can tell you, sitting on pins and needles waiting for this data because she's itching to start building next year. So.
Well, and I think even if she puts in staff that aren't going to be employed, I don't see that being an issue.
You'll have something to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
You
just-
can always
it's just
take away.
repetitive work for her that's already overworked. So just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. Can I?
Yes.
Yes, we're
You mentioned a few minutes ago that maybe some of us can get together for the negotiation meeting and discuss what we're going to do. You better post that, otherwise it'll be in.
I was thinking that, we'll do that.
It will have to be, it would have to be posted, and it would have to be executive session, because it would just be a negotiation. Yep. We knew it. That's what our plan was.
So you would see an open session for the simple purpose of going into executive session and coming back out into it. I will announce that if we go this route, that's all we'll do is go in executive session to prepare for the meeting later in the day.
I just don't want it to be in violation of.
Martha has told me she would be away at some point, and I'm not sure when that is, and she would be the other person, so.
I have a general question. So, so we're looking at borrowing from the state to cover the deficit that we had already accrued to the state, right? That's what our borrowing's looking like. Are we talking about perhaps borrowing to keep our district viable in addition to borrowing to cover the deficit, in the hopes that if we keep ourselves viable, we build for the future?
So,
or are we just
I just
covering
want
the
to
deficit?
So I want to explain how the deficit works, because I have been asked this and I explained it to the administration the other day when we met. So currently we have a $1 million deficit for purposes of E&D certification from the state at the end of FY18. That's our picture, or will be our picture when this year ends. We are going to, we'll say, borrow that million or $1.1 million just to cover it. That is, it's a deficit financing. It's so that we can actually pay our bills. That deficit that's on our balance sheet, if you will, does have to go away at some point. So how I envision this is FY20 would be when we would start repaying our debt, which will be $100,000 a year plus interest if they give us $1 million over 10 years. Obviously, those are estimates. And then we need to somehow build in our budget over those next 10 years as well an additional $100,000 to eliminate that deficit. And the only way a deficit can go away is if you receive more revenue or underspend your expenditures. But I don't see that happening in the tight spot that this district is, running against with staffing needs and everything else, unless we actually budget a deficit subsidy like we've budgeted for the school lunch fund. So that's how I see the FY20 forward budget going to get the district back on track from a balance sheet standpoint with the state, as well as paying the funding. But that would start in FY20. Does that?
So I think what you're saying is, in addition to planning for the $100,000 for the deficit we know,
Yes.
you're going to recommend planning for more so that we don't continue to build a
So it's
deficit?
not planning for more. We're getting financing to essentially allow us to pay our bills.
Right.
That is not revenue. That does not get rid of the deficit that's on our balance sheet. The only way to get rid of that deficit from a reporting standpoint to the state and a balance sheet standpoint is we actually have to fund that. We actually have to spend less than we get, or receive more than we spend. Same difference. It's just the same way as a town gets free cash. They have money left at the end of the year that they can then vote. It works the same way in a deficit standpoint. So in addition to paying the state back the monies that they've borrowed so that we can still function, we need to clear the deficit on our balance sheet by underspending or getting in more revenues than we are budgeting for
However,
over a
to
certain
get
period
to
of
your
time.
question.
But it's really going to only be, hold on just one second, roughly 700,000 because we're going to be receiving the school lunch money back from the towns in addition to the circuit breaker. We'll eventually get back to zero with the circuit breaker funds that come in.
So, based on my conversation with the deputy commissioner prior to the meeting on Tuesday, and my conversations with Representative Whips and with Representative Mark's staff, FY19 deficit spending authorization is part of the bill, and that made me crazy. And I contacted both legislators, hoping this was a reporting error in the newspaper, and it is not. So at our meeting Thursday night, it was discussed that I got to a point where I felt comfortable that the oversight would do everything it can to avoid stacking up additional losses, additional debt. But that provision to continue to deficit spend next year is in the legislation, and I find it troubling. As difficult it is to make cuts, we need to make them, rank them, bring activities back as we can afford to. I do not agree with limiting our borrowing to just the 1 or 1.1 million deficit. We need some working capital, but that is working capital to make operations more easy, so we don't waste a lot of time figuring out which bill to pay and how to age our payables, etc. If we start using our borrowed money as fill for a deficit shortage in next fiscal year, we will add to the deficit, and my sense is that our revenue picture in the future is not going to improve. The trend lines are
I
such,
agree
so
with
we
you.
really need to stay away from it.
I don't feel that the committee, the business manager, superintendent, or anybody in this district should be allowed to deficit spend next year, because that does not put our feet to the fire to manage this budget that we're going to vote to finalize.
Okay, so one of the things that the HART committee will be doing is, in collaboration with the Gil Montague grant as well, we'll be doing an enrollment study, like a $4,000 paid enrollment projection study. We'll also be doing a study of school choice and sort of where have our students gone and why. So hopefully that will give us more information about what, I just need to understand more about where students have gone, why they went there, and how likely it is they might be back. I guess I don't want to only be thinking of our district from where we are now. And I get that where we were before, we needed to trim our sails. But we cut over $500,000 in teacher salaries last year, and we were still in a huge hole, and I still don't understand that totally. So I'm not completely sold on the idea that it doesn't make sense to invest in our district's future at this time when we have the capacity for financing. So I hear you saying we need to hold our feet to the fire. And
So we can get additional money to help us from a cash flow standpoint, but if we are going to deficit spend, say, another $200,000 in FY19, that just increases our exposure and what we have to either increase revenues or decrease expenses in years going forward. So you're either going to have to make the cuts now or make them later. So I don't know how to.
David, I've heard you say before, you know, we can't get ourselves out of this by increasing our numbers of students. And what I've understood that we've gone through in the past few years is we've lost students, and then our reimbursement from the state goes down because we've lost students. So if we increase students, why doesn't that help us financially?
Because of hold harmless. Within the calculation, we don't deserve, according to the calculation, we don't deserve what we're getting. And so when you recalculate
But our numbers went down when we lost students.
Yeah, but
So
that
why
was
wouldn't they
based
go
on net
up?
school choice and net school.
See, that's what I want to understand. I just
Now-
need clearer,
I'll love it when that day comes, because I've decided I'll never understand that formula.
well, I
I'm
think
okay
we can
with
get
it, too.
closer.
I mean, I think if we can increase the students coming in via school choice, it helps, but then obviously, because of the staffing cuts we've made, we're already pushing up against class sizes. So I don't know if necessarily school choice is the place to go, but we
I'm
need to
not talking about
understand.
choice students.
Right,
I'm
we
talking
need to
about our
under-
own
Let's
students.
carry this over to the
Yeah.
next
Okay,
meeting,
got it,
and
yep.
I said we'd be out of here, but not at 9. I'd like us to hear a few citizen concerns.
I have a comment I need to
All right,
make.
you go right ahead, member.
I've heard from a few people that we should have had a forensic audit. An audit that we have basically is a forensic audit. Is that true?
It is the auditor's duty, under GASB, AICPA, all these professional organizations, that fraud examination is part of their duties as an auditor. So there is always the chance for material misstatements to be not found, but with the size of our district and what I saw happen at the audit when they were here, they did a phenomenal job. I've been involved with an audit, a government audit, for the last 5 years and performed them myself. They really, really go through our stuff with a fine-tooth comb, and I think more so now because of the situation we're in. And like I mentioned at the last couple meetings as well, I only have access back to FY16 and FY17, I believe, in the system. That is another fault of, unfortunately, not having a director of tech here during school hours. I have not been able to get through to get access to those prior years to do that forensic digging. But I know it was brought up that they were concerned about stealing and these kinds of things or whatever. It really, I've dug as far as I can go to the capacity that I have and, system capabilities. It really has been, as Gail mentioned, the principals bring a budget to the superintendent, and that gets hacked before it even comes to your door. And that has been a fault of the prior superintendent / business manager, because had the appropriate budgets been brought in prior years, the money from the towns would have come then rather than having to slap it on them now. And it could have been a gradual increase the way that it should be happening year over year. So we can start that now so that going forward, the impact to the towns isn't as great, but you have to budget appropriately, and that hasn't happened.
Because I've heard a couple of committee members say they don't really understand where that $500,000 went. It raises a question in my mind about a forensic audit. And that's why I'm asking you. I know you said the last time I asked you that question, you said that you saw the problems that we're having is basically the cause of under budgeting and improper management
Expenses
of
go
our
up every
expenses.
year. And like I said, the fact that we over budgeted transportation reimbursement by $300,000, if we hadn't done that in FY18, we would be fairly close to breaking even. We would not be in the deficit situation we were in. We would only have an expenditure deficit. But in the past, it has been, the substitute lines have been significantly under budgeted. The health insurance hasn't had budget for the exposure that we have for adding people back. There's just, and I think it was in an effort to not go after the towns for more money, but at the end of the day, all it did was hurt the district, because now we're trying to dig out of this hole, and the further you drag that along, the harder that gets.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Kathy.
In light of the fact that it is whatever time it is tonight, if there are members of the public that have comments or suggestions on the various budget lines that were reviewed tonight, what is the best way to get that information to you rather than rattling it off tonight?
I read the numerous emails sent me, and I imagine that the school committee does too. Not everyone may have everybody's email address.
What's on the website? So
Okay,
emails?
that would be my answer. Committee, do you have a?
That's a great.
That'd be my answer.
I read them all, I just had to stop responding to all.
And I would just ask if anyone emails the committee that it goes to all the committee members, because I personally know just this last week or two that there's been emails from a couple committee members, the whole committee, and I think this needs to be as big of a group effort as possible. So if you could please make sure you include all the committee members so that nobody's left in the dark and everyone's coming to the table next week with the same information.
So the reason for perhaps not everybody being included is to try and avoid deliberating outside of a meeting. Right. So committee members do not express an opinion on that's why we have a meeting.
Right. I'm not saying that as a whatever, but I'm just saying because it needs to be group when we're talking about this budget stuff and from the community, I just want to make sure that all the committee members know the concerns of the community as a whole.
Love to hear some suggestions on what cuts we have missed. Yes.
So maybe you could shed some light on this. So in reviewing the budget, I'm seeing things like newspaper advertising. I'm seeing things like various lines of buildings and grounds maintenance. So I'm wondering if the school committee has looked at those items to see how those expenses are impacting our budget. Because as a parent, as a taxpayer, when I'm driving my child into school in the morning and I see one of the most expensive landscaping companies manicuring our lawn, I'm wondering why we're paying for something like that when we're having to cut teacher salaries. And maybe it's information that you could provide to make me feel better sleeping at night. Also, I'm wondering about athletics. I want to preference my question to say that I am a full proponent for athletics. I don't want to see athletics go by any means. But I know that we sell tickets, we pay user fees for our children, and I'm wondering where that revenue is going and how that's impacting the numbers in the budget.
All of the sports-related income that comes in is student activity funds, so those fees go directly back to the sports, and there's members that manage those student activity funds at the school level, and I would suggest you reach out to them to find out where those funds are spent from the student activities, because they are separate from the district's financing or financial records.
So I have asked.
I didn't dare
So I'm
say it.
wondering if that's something maybe the committee could look into, because I have asked for those numbers, and I think there's some questions.
Okay.
I hate to see sports get cut, but
Tom, we're going to hear comments, but I don't know that we're going to answer them tonight.
It's my understanding that when the district agreement was set up in 1991, that the state had promised 100% reimbursement on transportation for high school and for elementary.
Actually, I think it was back in 1950 something, wasn't it?
Well, we.
Oh, the full regionalization in
Was-
the 90s.
It's
Okay.
my understanding that that has never happened. I'm curious what percentage we get from the state, and any strategies on trying to change that.
I think it's around 50% that we either get or don't get. They're about the same.
And do we just tilt at windmills, or is there any way of doing anything?
They do say, as funds are available, they cover themselves in their little.
And I think that was part of the issue this year. It was budgeted at 65% and we got closer to 50%. And that's where we need to be more conservative in our revenue budgets. And if we budget 50% and the state has the funds to give us more, then we're in the better. But we've got to be more conservative with our revenue budgets.
Jim McRae.
Real quickly, David, you've explained other times that one of the reasons that we did not see us as anywhere as much of a savings as we hoped when those harsh teacher cuts from last year took place is because of the unemployment self-insurance. I might have missed it, but I haven't heard that discussed and tonight regarding the current cuts. So when we're cutting staff, I might have missed that.
Well, I joined you in missing it. I was informed along the way that we're self-insured, which I guess is technically true, but we are premium-based, so we're paying a percentage. So our losses were the result of overspending. That is, what's 5% on most of our budget, 80% of our budget's, it's still real money, but it wasn't as awful as we're writing a check as if they're still our employee for the, it just gets spread. I mean, it's a premium for insurance. They are going to try to get it back. They're not, over time.
But before that was spoken as if it was a major reason why we didn't realize much savings last year. Is that the same situation this year? I guess is what I'm asking regarding the current staff cuts.
That erroneous correction has now been eliminated, but other things are still piling up so that we have a $300,000 or more cut to make, depending on what we add back in for. But we're still 300,000 and then some away. But it's actually good news, because if my scenario were to obtain and we cut $1 million in wages, we'd end up having to pay out next year $375,000 of it. So it's actually good news. We don't have that exposure there, but we're still overspending in enough places that we are losing money year after year.
Gail?
Gail.
I'd like to answer the facility question. That's all right.
Give it a try.
So that's a very good question, and I myself have had the same question. One of my hats until this year, we have an excellent facilities director that worked with me last year. I was the facilities director. The grounds for the schools go out to bid every year, every 3 years. And the law is that you take the lowest bid. And I can tell you, in the 10 years that I've been here, the company that does our landscaping has never changed the price, and it's always the lowest bid. And they leave us a large lawnmower here on the property, so the custodians or the athletic director can use that lawnmower in between, because there are some sports that need to be cut more frequently. We've cut back, actually, with agreeing between the company and the district on how much they do, so we have saved in that regard. What was your other question? Oh, to look at the facilities lines. So there are lists, and in prior years, when I started doing this, I did a list with exact costs. So those costs are needed and exact, and we do collaborative bidding for supplies. The money that has been cut since the last budget was printed is real, and we won't overspend it, and that was done with the facilities director. Your other question was about the newspaper price? Yeah. We also have talked as a group about the newspaper price. There are some things that legally we have to put in the newspaper. If we don't need to spend it all, we won't, and then that will help the bottom line. But if we cut it and you have to put things in the newspaper, then
we have to cut later.
We have to pay it.
So does each school have, that newspaper, also, the newspaper line also, we belong to School Spring. We have to pay, that's, if I remember correctly, that's about $3,000 a year. That goes to that line, newspaper advertising. So that's part of
And
that.
there are legal obligations, as many of you know, when you go out to bid. So that also is part of it.
So does every school bid, or we bid as a district?
We bid as a district.
So can you explain the difference as to why we have like one company here and another company at another school? It's my understanding we have a couple different companies.
I think
The
in Northfield,
town-
the
the
rec
town
department
does
is
Northfield.
taking care of our grounds.
Okay, thank you.
I also wanted to address, you talked about user fees and paying for tickets at games. So, Tanya started to talk about, and It's user fees and gate receipts. And it's the same premise as when we were talking about circuit breaker, or we're talking about,
All right, I'd like the next person to speak to raise their hand before doing so.
sorry.
Yes.
But it.
You're not recognized, ma'am. You may raise your hand.
Brenda.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
She's the
I'm tired of
Sorry,
losing.
she's the
Come
answer.
on, come to the table, so it's not a disemboweled voice.
So, in answer to your question, we have, and as we talked about, there's lots of subcategories. There's the general fund, there's circuit breaker, there's many different funds. There's a user's fee fund, and there's also a gate receipt fund. So, if we have cut some of our sports, we're going to be receiving less user fees, and we're going to be receiving less gate receipts. Football has gone into a co-op program, is my understanding, for this next year. Football is always one of the programs that generated the most amount of revenue for gate receipts. I can tell you that the budget, if you go back and you look at the budget, athletic transportation, we've taken a significant amount out of the budget, and it's going to user fees. Same with referees. It's going to gate receipts. So our gate receipts and our user fees are going to be funding, and they always have. They've always been, when we would start to overrun a budget, we would have that as a fallback. However, there are policies and procedures in place that designates what we can use user fees for, what we can use gate receipts for. It's going to be a slippery slope as to if we're going to have enough money that we're bringing in for user fees and gate receipts to cover what we have. It's going to be tight.
So we can generate a report called fund balances. It starts out on the top with general fund, and then there are 60 additional other funds. They include school lunch, Title 4A, whole bunch of stuff. But the athletic fees in February had brought in over $10,000. I saw the revenue. So, but this is kind of how adds to our confusion, is we have so many funds, 60 in addition to the general fund. Yes.
Are you taking public comment?
Yes, I am.
Do you want me to stay here or?
You're called on. You can go anywhere you want, but a microphone would probably be helpful.
My name is Susan Wright. As a resident of Northfield, who was a business manager for a school district for 7 years and currently serve as the finance director for the city of Northampton, I was shocked to hear the depth of the deficit and the fact that this deficit accumulated over multiple years. The cumulative effect of under-budgeting expenses and overestimating revenues, combined with the usual challenges of running a school district, has resulted in a school district and fiscal crisis and the complete loss of confidence in the school committee. I have worked in local government here in Western Massachusetts for 33 years and never seen anything like this. The school committee abdicated its responsibility for fiscal oversight. I believe school committee members that were on the board during this period should consider resigning and allow others with the knowledge, ability, and interest in seeing the district regain the fiscal confidence of the taxpayers. I myself would volunteer. The school committee should revisit their decision on the interim superintendent. More than ever, the district needs an experienced superintendent with a track record, and Ms. Scallion was clearly the most qualified candidate. The district should consider closing 2 of the smallest elementary schools in order to maintain the greatest amount of educational resources for our students. It makes little sense to keep 4 schools open at the expense of eliminating athletics, staff, arts, music. And combining students from the 4 towns into 2 schools would provide the district with more flexibility around class sizes, eliminate travel time for teachers between the schools, and use special education resources more efficiently. Closing 2 schools would put the front and center the educational needs of our students, rather than perpetuating the feel-good idea of a small local school being able to adequately serve student needs. If we don't, we will have 4 schools decimated by budget cuts. School committee needs to budget for an experienced full-time school business manager. A district of this complexity cannot be run without a full-time financial oversight. A superintendent should not be expected to do both jobs. I've always considered my local tax dollars the best spent money of all, of any level of local government, and I still believe that. I support local public schools. I would consider supporting additional funds for our schools, but we owe it to the taxpayers to make smart, rational, non-emotional decisions that put students first and make financial sense and educational sense. I cannot support additional funding that continues to keep open 4 elementary schools for a region with a combined population of 6,600 people. Hard decisions need to be made. Students should not suffer because of the poor financial decisions of the administration. Taxpayers need to have confidence that their dollars are being spent wisely. This is not a time for emotions to rule, and there's no time for that. It's critical for the future of the district. Thank you.
Additional comments?
I'm wondering, and I think maybe Gail, you're best suited to answer this, just specifically on the specials adjustments that you made to make sure that there's an equitable distribution and still preserve those specials. My question is how that marries with Megan's presentation around the reduction in staff. Is there going to be a music teacher and an instructional teacher? Is that? Or is there still going to be a music instrumental instructor and a music teacher?
No.
No. So there's no full-time music teacher?
No. There's a full-time vocal music teacher, and we're trying to, we haven't worked out exactly yet who is going to do what. There's going to be some sharing with throughout the district, whether it's from here to there, or some vocal, some instrumental.
I would urge folks to, we'll carry it over to the next. So we're going to carry the development and giving conversation over to the next meeting. I would urge folks, write us. I'm going to hear one more comment and then entertain a motion to adjourn. Stan.
Dan Garland, Bernardston. First of all, I want to thank the school staff administration and all the hard work they did in presenting their cuts for us tonight. I urge the school committee to at least give them a chance, now that they've come through with all these cuts, and they've got ideas that they think will work. Work with them, try to make it work. We've got a hard time, we don't make cuts now, we're not going to make it later. Let's try to follow their lead, see if it works. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon?
Make a motion, we adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
I second.
Can I?
There being no discussion?
Can I just quickly comment to let him know that the budget that's in front of them that still has an additional 280 is after the administration working with myself and Brenda to already make cuts. So the budget that's presented to them right now is what they will be working with to come up with additional cuts.
All right, there's a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous.
Must have been a bad person in the previous